The smoke of battle drifts over a field of carnage, where the bodies of monsters and soldiers alike litter the scorched earth. Amidst the fallen, the warrior stands tall, her breath heavy and ragged as she surveys the grim aftermath of the struggle. She looks down at the massive, defeated creature before her, expressing genuine surprise that a mere orc could have pushed her to such limits and caused so much trouble for her forces. With a grim expression, she notes that while the cost was high and many of their own leaders fell in the process, the Demon King has finally been vanquished, ending the reign of terror. Raising her heavy blade high, she addresses the Black Ogre, acknowledging his solitary stand as the last of the rearguard and offering him a final moment to speak any last words before the end. The wounded beast lies motionless, his life's blood staining the earth as his consciousness begins to drift away from the battlefield and into the dark shadows of his past. In the depths of his memory, cruel voices of other demons echo, mocking his appearance as a hideous pig and demanding he use his only asset, his brute strength, to fight and die for their cause. Returning to the present, the knight prepares to bring her sword down for the final strike, her resolve unwavering as she nears the conclusion of this long and bloody conflict. Suddenly, her eyes widen in sheer disbelief, and her breath catches in her throat as something entirely unexpected halts her strike at the very last second. She stands over the broken form of the beast, her blade poised for the final blow. Beneath her, the dying ogre's thoughts drift to a life defined only by his utility as a weapon, a silent plea echoing in the void of his mind for someone, anyone, to have seen him as more than just a tool of destruction. Her expression falters, the cold resolve in her eyes replaced by a sudden, jarring realization. The weight of the creature's unspoken sorrow seems to reach her, freezing her mid-strike as she stares down at the monster she was sworn to slay. The warrior's gauntlet hand trembles against the hilt of her massive broadsword. The certainty that guided her through the long war begins to crumble, leaving her paralyzed by an unexpected surge of empathy for the enemy lying at her feet. With a heavy thud, the blade is lowered, the execution abandoned. The dust of the battlefield settles around them, marking a silent, unexpected turning point in a conflict that was supposed to have reached its end. Far from the blood-soaked plains, the sun filters through the dense canopy of a peaceful forest. A hand reaches down to pluck a mushroom from the mossy earth, though the tranquility of the moment is marred by the looming threat of orc bandits whispered to be prowling the woods. The blonde elf explains to her companion that remnants of the Demon King's army have begun to organize into dangerous factions. She notes that groups of orcs are banding together to raid nearby villages, turning the supposed peace following the war into a new, terrifying reality for the common folk who thought the danger had passed. She elaborates on the severity of the situation, revealing that 5 villages have already been razed in just a single month. Because these are no mere disorganized stragglers, but a coordinated force, the Adventurers Guild has declared a state of emergency, stationing seasoned warriors in every settlement to prevent further slaughter and restore order to the chaotic countryside. A young boy listens with growing dread, finally understanding why his companions returned to the village so suddenly. The women confirm his fears, explaining that the forest has become a hunting ground for these organized remnants, making any journey outside the village walls a gamble with death that they are no longer willing to take. He urges them to return to the village quickly, his hands clutching a basket as anxiety lines his face. Beside him, the blonde adventurer offers a confident smile, resting a hand on her sword hilt while assuring him that an A-rank adventurer like herself has nothing to fear from a mere orc. She draws her blade with a sharp cry, invoking the power of the wind. A shimmering blade of air erupts from her weapon, slicing through a thick forest trunk as if it were paper, leaving the young boy wide-eyed with awe at her martial prowess. Despite the display of strength, the scholar with glasses delivers a sharp tap to her head, lecturing her about the recklessness of destroying the forest trees. She reminds her companion of the lessons they learned as children, leaving the warrior to grumble under her breath while the scholar wonders if living alone in the city has made her forget her manners. Their bickering is cut short when a series of sharp, rhythmic cracks echo through the woods. The boy freezes, his ears twitching at the sound, while the scholar looks back toward the path they just cleared, questioning if the noise is simply the aftermath of the fallen tree. The forest falls into an eerie, expectant silence, broken only by the deepening groans of splintering wood that seem to come from every direction at once. Suddenly, a massive, dark-skinned hand erupts through a nearby trunk, shattering the wood into a spray of lethal splinters. The sheer violence of the movement catches the group off guard, their faces pale with sudden realization. Emerging from the wreckage is a towering, muscular beast with dark skin and ivory horns, its eyes fixed on them with predatory intent. The boy gasps in terror as the realization hits them. An orc has found them, and is far more formidable than the story suggested. Reacting with the speed of a seasoned veteran, she thrusts herself in front of her companions, shouting for them to take cover behind her. She doesn't hesitate, crossing her blades to unleash a devastating gale of energy that carves a glowing X into the air, catching the monster in a whirlwind of steel and wind. She lunges forward with a cry, her blade wreathed in intense heat as she invokes the Blaze Saber technique. However, the strike fails to bite deep, meeting a resistance so fierce it feels as though she is striking solid stone rather than flesh. Stunned by the creature's unnatural resilience, she stares into its glowing eyes, questioning the very nature of the beast before her. Its hide is far tougher than any ordinary monster she has encountered, leaving her momentarily paralyzed by the realization that her magic was ineffective. The massive creature suddenly shifts its posture, rising not to strike back, but to reveal what it had been shielding with its own body. The group watches in stunned silence as the perceived threat transforms into a desperate guardian, holding something fragile in its massive palms. Cradled within those monstrous hands is a small human girl, her face flushed with fever and her breathing shallow. The sight of a vulnerable child in the care of such a beast leaves the adventurers speechless, their hostility instantly replaced by confusion and concern. Lowering his head in a gesture of profound humility, the dark-skinned giant offers the child forward, his voice a low, guttural rumble as he begs them to save her life. The realization hits home for the group. He wasn't an aggressor, but a desperate protector seeking help for a dying war. As the sun begins to dip behind the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, the tension of the forest gives way to a somber journey back towards civilization. They eventually reach the safety of the village, the quiet streets, and familiar architecture, a stark contrast to the life-or-death encounter they just experienced in the deep woods. Within the warmth of a modest home, the child is finally laid to rest in a soft bed. While the scholar and the boy look on with deep concern, the group begins the task of nursing the mysterious girl back to health, their minds filled with questions about the noble beast they left behind in the shadows. She stands by as the young girl lies motionless, her face flushed with a deep fever as she struggles for breath beneath a damp cloth. The elf observes the child with a heavy heart, recognizing the symptoms of the dreaded gate black fever, a troublesome ailment that has taken a firm hold. Turning her attention to the village's security, she inquires about the creature that brought the girl here, only to be told by the elder that the beast is securely bound in the village's underground dungeon. He explains that the cage is forged from magi iron, a material crafted by the great magi himself. He continues with a cold confidence, asserting that such bars are unbreakable by anything short of magic, a power he believes a simple orc could never possess. He commends the decision to keep the creature contained, viewing it as a necessary precaution. The elder then instructs her and the young boy to maintain a constant watch, ensuring that no further complications arise while the situation is assessed. Startled by the implication of his words, she asks if the creature is to be spared, but the elder firmly states that the final judgment regarding the orc's life rests solely with him, regardless of its recent actions. As the weight of the decision hangs in the air, a memory surfaces of a brave warrior promising to return safely after vanquishing the monsters that threaten their peace, a promise that clearly still resonates. Shaking off the past, the scholar with glasses announces her intent to concoct a spiritual medicine, enlisting help for the task while privately wondering why a monster would ever go to such lengths to save a human child and where it could have found her. She observes the child closely, noting the damp cloth on the girl's forehead and the flush of fever. A startling realization hits her. This child is not human. Meanwhile, the blonde adventurer walks down a wooden hallway, her expression troubled as the sounds of angry shouting echo through the building. Voices call out insults, demanding to know what the pig was doing near their village. Beyond the corridor, a mob has gathered outside the heavy iron bars of a holding cell. They jeer and threaten the prisoner, their faces twisted with hatred as they vow to finish what was started. Inside the cage, the massive orc remains motionless, his body slumped forward. Several arrows protrude from his back and shoulders, and a dark pool of blood has formed on the stone floor beneath him. While the prisoner bleeds in silence, she steps in a main hall where the villagers erupt in cheers, thanking her for capturing the beast. The elder and the scarred warrior look on with grim satisfaction, praising her skill as an adventurer. The knight heroine stands nearby, her gaze cold as she looks toward the cage. She argues that leaving such a creature alive is a risk they cannot afford and suggests they end its life immediately. Ignoring her cold assessment, the orc slowly lifts his head. His voice is a low, pained rumble as he asks only one thing: if the child will truly be saved. His words only incite more rage. A villager strikes him across the face, cursing his pig tongue and complaining about how tough his hide is. The blonde elf can only watch in silent, wide-eyed horror as the cruelty unfolds. She rushes forward, her voice cracking as she commands the mob to halt. She explains that by the order of Magi Sama, the orc's fate is not yet decided, and no one is permitted to lay a hand on him. Her plea falls on deaf ears as a villager calls for a blacksmith's hammer to finish the job. Because of this defiance, the crowd's bloodlust only intensifies. A woman screams for the right to execute the beast herself, while the orc is suddenly racked by a surge of magical energy that illuminates his massive frame in the darkness of his cell. Seeing the escalating violence, she casts aside her weapon in a desperate gesture of peace, pleading with the villagers to stop their assault. In response, a grieving woman steps forward to challenge her, demanding to know why she would defend such a monster. The woman's voice trembles with rage as she recounts how her own family was slaughtered by demons, and she accuses the orc of being the father of the child he brought. The weight of these words causes her to hesitate, her fist tightening until her knuckles turn white. Internally, she struggles with her own hatred, admitting that she too wishes for his death, yet she demands the orc explain his motives. Slumped against the cold stone floor, the orc barely manages to whisper a plea for the girl, Nanoa, begging for her life to be spared. He looks up with a single, glowing eye, reiterating that his own life is forfeit and he cares not for his own suffering, so long as the child is protected. This selfless declaration leaves her stunned, unable to comprehend why a creature of his kind would sacrifice everything for a human. Despite his desperate plea, the villagers continue to swarm around his broken form, their shadows looming over him as the cycle of hatred continues unabated. While the dark-skinned giant remained still, a sudden, violent explosion rocked the village, shattering the tense silence. Alicia's eyes widened in shock as the ground trembled beneath her feet. Panicked shouts erupted from the villagers, who wondered if the blast had come from outside. Sensing immediate danger, she commanded Kirisu to stay behind and hide, her voice sharp with urgency as she prepared to investigate the source of the chaos. Emerging into the open, the source of the destruction became terrifyingly clear. A horde of armed orcs had breached the perimeter. The villagers recoiled in horror, their fear quickly turning to resentment as they accused the captive ogre of summoning his kin to slaughter them. Seeing the impending massacre, she didn't hesitate, drawing her weapon and charging headlong toward the encroaching monsters. She shouted her intent to engage, her resolve hardening even as the sheer number of enemies threatened to overwhelm the small settlement. With a fierce cry, the elf unleashed the Tempest Blade, a devastating surge of magical energy that tore through the front lines of the Orcish ranks. However, as the dust settled, a chilling sensation washed over her. She attempted to cast a silencing spell, but a skeletal hand reached out from the shadows, signaling a far more sinister presence than mere orcs. Despite the power of her initial strike, more of the brutish creatures continued to advance, their heavy footsteps thumping against the earth. They seemed emboldened, moving with a coordinated purpose that suggested they were being led by a higher intelligence. She gasped as she realized her magic had been completely neutralized. The protective aura she relied on vanishing in an instant. From the gloom, a raspy, mocking voice began to count, the sound of bone clicking against bone echoing through the air. The true architect of the raid revealed himself, a skeletal figure draped in a tattered dark hood, his hollow sockets glowing with malevolent intent. He chuckled to himself, noting with greedy delight the abundance of precious elves gathered in one place. This undead master proclaimed that he had finally located the legendary village of the Thousand-Year Witch. He commanded his Orcish thralls to refrain from killing the elves, as they were valuable commodities, though he cruelly granted them permission to feast upon the human men once their organs had been harvested. The orcs responded with a bloodthirsty roar, their hunger ignited by the promise of a gruesome feast. While the undead master's orders echo through the village, young Kirisu finds himself staring into the dark cell of the captive beast. He recalls his sister's warnings about the orc bandits, his heart hammering against his ribs as he wonders what to do. He inches closer to the iron bars, but the massive prisoner suddenly rises, casting a shadow that swallows the boy whole. The sheer scale of the creature leaves him breathless and paralyzed. With a deafening crack, the beast seizes the thick metal rods and shatters them like dry twigs. Kirisu lets out a piercing scream, his mind reeling at the display of impossible strength. The monster steps through the wreckage, his dark skin glistening and his muscles tensed for violence. The boy stares up, convinced that his life is about to end at the hands of this nightmare. A heavy, calloused hand reaches out, closing the distance between predator and prey. Instead of the expected strike, the giant's palm rests gently atop the boy's head in a silent gesture of comfort. Kirisu's eyes widen, tears of confusion and relief blurring his vision as the terrifying beast shows a spark of humanity. He remains frozen, the warmth of the touch lingering even as the hand pulls away. The dark warrior glances toward the fallen villagers outside before promising to return shortly. With a final look at the stunned boy, he turns his back on the cage and strides toward the chaos of the battlefield. While he marched toward the center of the village, the battle there had already reached a desperate peak. The warrior and the blonde elf stood their ground against the skeletal mage and his Orcish lackeys, their weapons drawn in a final, defiant stand against the encroaching darkness. She was clearly at her limit, her breath coming in ragged gasps as sweat poured down her face. The toll of the prolonged struggle was etched into every line of her weary features. Yet she refused to yield to the exhaustion threatening to consume her. Her struggle intensified as the skeletal mage unleashed a crushing wave of dark energy, a gravity curse that slammed her into the dirt with bone-shattering force. She cried out in agony as the invisible weight pinned her down, leaving her helpless and gasping for air against the cold earth. Beneath his hollow gaze, she lay incapacitated while the Lich gloated over the battlefield. It was a grim realization that this wraith was the one leading the Orcish bandits, orchestrating the destruction of the village with cold, calculated efficiency. His power was overwhelming, leading her to realize the true horror of their opponent, a high-ranking demon capable of nullifying physical strikes and, most devastatingly, silencing her own magical abilities. Without her spells, she was stripped of her greatest weapon, left to watch as the situation turned hopeless. Around her, the village's defense was crumbling, with orcs looming over the fallen and victory seemingly out of reach. But then a rhythmic, heavy thud began to vibrate through the ground, drawing her wide-eyed gaze toward the edge of the clearing as the very earth seemed to tremble. Her attention shifted as even the undead sorcerer paused, his skeletal head tilting as he registered the approaching tremors. A flicker of confusion crossed his empty sockets as he wondered what could possibly be making such a thunderous and imposing approach. His hollow eyes widened as the massive prisoner, the black ogre, stepped into the light, his presence looming over the battlefield like a dark mountain. She could only stare in disbelief, her mind racing to understand how the beast had managed to shatter his iron restraints and find his way to the heart of the conflict. The massive, dark-skinned ogre stands firm as the ground trembles beneath his weight, facing the skeletal figure in the tattered robes. The undead mage narrows his hollow sockets, questioning where such a creature could have come from, noting that this is no mere mountain bandit. Without waiting for an answer, the Lich raises a bony hand, channeling his dark energy into a singular point. He chants the incantation for a supernova great explosion, a spell of immense destructive power, while the ogre merely stands his ground, glaring back with silent defiance. A violent explosion consumes the area, a wall of fire and smoke erupting where the warrior once stood. As the dust begins to settle, the skeletal sorcerer is stunned to see the beast still standing amidst the embers. His rage mounts as he bellows insults, calling the creature a filthy pig for daring to ignore the words of a high-ranking demon, a slight he deems worthy of 10,000 deaths. Nearby, the blonde elf watches the unfolding chaos in utter disbelief. Her voice trembles as she questions how any living being could survive a direct hit from such catastrophic magic, while the mage himself screams in denial at the impossible sight. Ignoring the lingering flames and the shock of his enemies, the dark-skinned titan surges forward, his massive frame unyielding against the magical onslaught. Panic finally sets in for the Lich as he observes the creature's impossible durability up close. His mind races, connecting the dots between the abnormal resilience, the black skin, and the prominent horns, leading him to a terrifying realization about the true identity of his opponent. He recoils in sudden, bone-chilling realization, his jaw hanging open as he stammers out a question, wondering if the beast before him is truly the legendary Black Knight. Before he can finish the thought, a massive, dark fist connects with his skull, the sheer force of the impact shattering his ancient bone into a cloud of dust and fragments. The blow sends his tattered remains hurtling through the air like a discarded rag, while the warrior stands unmoved, watching as the undead sorcerer's broken form finally skids to a halt in the dirt. Turning his gaze toward the group of lesser orcs who had been watching the spectacle, the dark warrior growls a command for them to vanish, making it clear that he has no patience for their presence while he is occupied. Terrified by the display of raw power, the pig-faced creatures scramble away, their high-pitched squeals echoing through the air as they retreat in a frantic, disorganized mass. As the dust settles, the blonde elf watches him with wide, tearful eyes, her mind racing with confusion as to why such a creature would step in to defend them. Sensing her gaze, he looks back and gruffly inquires if she has sustained any injuries. The moment of respite is short-lived. However, as the massive warrior suddenly loses his footing and crashes heavily into the earth, his strength seemingly spent, he lies motionless in the dirt, leaving the elf to cry out in alarm, her confusion deepening as she wonders what could have brought such a powerful being to his knees so abruptly. He lies motionless as Alicia stares down in disbelief, realizing that the sheer number of foes he has slain has imbued his very fists with a power rivaling legendary blades, rendering her own defensive spells utterly futile against him. He is none other than Zeed, the Black Ogre, a member of the demon race who once fought the legendary hero to a standstill, now reduced to a battered heap on the forest floor. As he lies bleeding, he looks up at the warrior woman standing over him and asks a single, pointed question. Why has she not ended his life? Instead of delivering a final blow, she looks down at him with tears streaming down her face, leaving him baffled as to why a victor would weep for the vanquished. She remains silent for a moment, the tears blurring her vision as she wonders if the reason for her sorrow is that they are fundamentally the same. Looking out over the vast, empty horizon, she explains that, like him, she has been burdened by expectations since birth, being the sole hero in this world carrying the blood of angels. She continues her confession, admitting that from the time she was a small child, she was forced to fight simply because she was the only one capable of doing so, with no other way of living ever permitted to her. Suddenly, her sorrow vanishes, replaced by a bright, impulsive resolve as she points a finger at the stunned demon and declares that she has made a decision. He is to become her husband. Her sudden proposal left him utterly speechless, his mind reeling as he stared back at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend the shift from mortal enemies to potential spouses. As he struggled to process the situation, she simply smiled and declared the matter settled, urging him to stand so they could depart before any prying eyes discovered them. She abandoned her heavy blade in the dirt, signaling that for her, the long years of conflict had finally reached their end. In the days that followed, she proved to be a woman of overwhelming force, unilaterally deciding every detail of their new life together, from the location of their home to the rhythm of their daily routine. He found himself swept along by her relentless energy, unable to offer any resistance to her sudden, vibrant plans for their future. Their existence became a series of simple, shared moments. She would claim a modest house as their own, cheerily announce a meal of fresh fish, or insistently drag him toward the warmth of a nearby hot spring. Though he was bound by no duty and could have walked away at any moment, he remained by her side. The reason for his staying was rooted in a memory of her vulnerability, specifically the sight of tears streaming down her face during a rare moment of quiet. That display of raw emotion had anchored him to her more firmly than any command ever could. She carried a loneliness he recognized all too well, a solitude mirrored in his own life as a pariah. It was this shared understanding that fueled his silent vow to ensure she would never have to shed such tears again. Deep within his heart, a single, clear desire took hold. He simply wanted to see her smile. For him, their unlikely bond was like a solitary flower blooming in a quiet field, beginning to take root in the peace they had found together. She lived a life of simple joys, her laughter ringing out as she tended to the daily chores of their new home. Seeing her so genuinely happy filled the massive warrior with a sense of pride, knowing he was the reason for her radiant smile. As night fell, they sat together under a vast, starlit sky, watching a lone shooting star streak across the darkness. Recalling a legend she had heard, she explained that making a wish upon such a star could make anything come true. She spoke of her elven mentor who once used the light of a captured star to craft a miraculous panacea, before turning to ask if there was anything he desired. The two of them remained silent for a moment, lost in the quiet beauty of the night and the weight of her question. With a look of profound tenderness, she then made a startling confession. She wanted to have a child with him. The ogre could only stare in stunned silence, his breath catching at the depth of her longing. Their hands found each other in the soft grass, a silent seal on the bond they had forged in this peaceful sanctuary. He felt a certainty he had never known before, believing with all his heart that this connection was exactly what he had been searching for his entire life. But the tranquility was shattered in an instant when she suddenly collapsed, coughing up blood as a mysterious and violent illness took hold of her. She lay confined to her bed, her strength fading as the impossible reality of their union weighed heavily on Zaid. He looked upon her, tormented by the thought that a demon like himself and a woman of angelic blood were never meant to share the burden of a child. Despite her frailty, she offered a reassuring smile, insisting that she was all right. Her resolve was unshakable. She vowed that no matter the cost, she would protect the life growing within her. Her gaze softened with a maternal warmth that transcended her physical pain. In that moment, she embraced her identity not as a warrior, but as a mother, finding a new source of strength in her devotion. As the days passed, her body grew increasingly weak, yet she never ceased her gentle ministrations. She stroked her swelling abdomen with such tenderness, it seemed as though she were pouring her very life force into her unborn child. Then, the silence of the cabin was shattered by a sharp, healthy cry as their daughter entered the world. Zaid cradled the small, vibrant life in his massive arms, a stark contrast to the exhausted woman resting behind him. But the effort of the birth had pushed her to the brink, her life force nearly spent. With her remaining strength, she whispered a final request to Zaid, pleading with him to show their daughter, Nanoa, the vast world that lay beyond their secluded home. She spoke of a future where the girl would not be confined by the shadows of the forest or the bloodlines of her parents. She envisioned a life where Nanoa could witness the beauty of the world and choose her own destiny, whether as a hero or a king. Reaching out with a trembling hand, she asked him to hold her one last time. He took her hand in his, a silent promise to fulfill her dying wish as she prepared to depart. She lies still as the massive warrior cradles their newborn daughter, the weight of her sacrifice hanging heavy in the air. With tears streaming down her face, she whispers a final apology, her voice trembling with the pain of knowing she cannot remain by their side to see the child grow. After her passing, a simple wooden cross marks her final resting place amidst a sea of flowers, where he stands in solemn silence. Her parting words echo in his mind, urging him to find love again on his journey and not to feel bound by duty to her memory. Standing in that same vibrant field, he holds the crying infant close while remembering her final, playful encouragement, that someone will surely love him because, in her eyes, he was the most handsome man in the world. He stares ahead with a gaze hardened by loss, but softened by the new life in his arms, the resolve to fulfill his promise etched into his features. Sometime later, within the quiet confines of Healer's workshop, he watches over the young girl as she begins to stir. He calls out her name, his voice a low rumble of relief as she opens her eyes to the unfamiliar surroundings. Beside him, the blonde elf explains that the child will recover thanks to a potent high elf panacea she administered. She then admits her profound shock, noting that the world believed the great hero had perished in the final battle, never imagining she had borne a child with one of the demon race. He reacts with a sharp start, his glowing eyes widening as the weight of her words and the potential consequences of their discovery settle upon him. He stood tall, his massive frame casting a shadow as he explained the magic that had allowed him to see the truth. He apologized for the intrusion, but the elf remained wary, noting that caution was only natural when dealing with one of the demon race. She paced the room, her mind reeling from the sheer absurdity of his journey. To cross a continent without rest, endure the wrath of villagers, and even withstand the effects of wraith magic, all for a single child, spoke of a determination that defied logic. Looking at him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of exhaustion just contemplating his physical resilience. It was a level of stamina that bordered on the impossible, even for a creature of his stature. He bowed his head slightly, offering a sincere word of gratitude for the care she had provided to the young girl. However, she dismissed his thanks, her gaze sharp as she demanded to know the true motivation behind his extreme actions. She pressed him further, acknowledging the love he clearly held for the fallen hero. She questioned how he could bear the burden of raising the very child whose birth had led to the death of the woman he cherished, wondering if resentment didn't lurk beneath his stoic exterior. His eyes narrowed as he processed her words, the weight of the past hanging heavy in the air. The silence between them stretched, filled with the unspoken memories of a life lost and a promise kept. He finally spoke, his voice low and devoid of pretense, as he claimed to be nothing more than a simple orc. He insisted that complex thoughts and heavy burdens were beyond him, choosing instead to focus on the sleeping child who represented the only legacy left to him. As he looked back, he recalled a rare moment of patience from the otherwise headstrong warrior who had been his companion. She had waited for him once, a memory that seemed to anchor his resolve in the present, regardless of the difficulty. He stands tall, his massive frame a testament to his strength, as he reflects on the bond that defines his existence. Daria had fulfilled her role as a mother by bringing Nanoa into the world, and in turn, he had vowed without hesitation to raise the child as his own daughter. Looking toward the elf, he declares that the girl is the most precious treasure left behind by the two of them. Alicia remains silent for a moment, her gaze softening as she acknowledges the depth of the ogre's devotion. This devotion brings to mind a quiet night under a vast, starlit sky, where the young girl once looked up at a falling streak of light. She had wondered aloud if such celestial wonders truly possessed the power to grant any wish one might hold. With a playful, knowing smile, she had kept her own desires a secret, even as the blonde elf stood nearby. It was a moment of pure, childhood innocence that stood in stark contrast to the harsh realities of their world. Returning to the present, Alicia breaks the silence by calling out to him. She poses a sudden, unexpected question, asking if he would be willing to come and live within the safety of her village. She elaborates on the grim state of the world, noting that many of her kin perished in the Great War 7 years prior. Now, with the common enemy of the Demon King's army defeated, the internal politics of human society are becoming increasingly volatile and dangerous. Her expression turns solemn as she makes her true intentions clear. She wants him to remain with them, serving as a guardian and a deterrent against the growing threats that loom over her people. The request hangs in the air, catching him completely off guard. His glowing eyes widen, reflecting the weight of the choice now laid before him. He listens as the blonde elf explains that the child's recent ailment was merely the result of exhaustion from their long journey. She advises that it would be best for the girl to remain in one place and rest until she is a bit older and stronger. Despite her reasoning, the massive warrior remains hesitant, declining the offer because he fears his presence as a demon would only bring trouble and misfortune to the peaceful villagers. Seeing his reluctance, she shifts her approach, adopting a more authoritative posture as she demands a staggering payment of 100 million gold for the life-saving medicine she provided. The sheer scale of the debt leaves him completely stunned. She presses the point, explaining that such a potent panacea is never free, especially considering the rare ingredients and the high cost of labor for a high elf like herself. She pointedly asks if he can pay the full amount immediately so they can be on their way. With a knowing smirk, the elf presents the only alternative. If he cannot produce the gold, he will have to stay and work in the village to pay off the debt. Just as the weight of the situation settles on him, the young girl stirs from her sleep, letting out a long yawn as she wakes to the morning light. She looks up at him with a bright, innocent smile, calling out to her father and chirping about how hungry she is, specifically requesting a meal of rabbit. Staring back at her, the demon's eyes widen as the reality of his predicament and his love for the child collide, leaving him with no choice but to accept the elf's terms. He placed a massive, calloused hand gently atop the young girl's head, a surprisingly tender gesture for such a formidable creature. In response, she leaned into the touch, her face lighting up with a serene, blissful smile as she felt the warmth of his protection. Having accepted the weight of his new circumstances, the ogre spoke with a voice like grinding stone, formally acknowledging that he would be staying in the village for the foreseeable future. His expression remained stoic, yet there was a clear sense of resignation in his glowing eyes as he committed to this unexpected path. With the young girl perched securely on his broad shoulder, he stood before the modest, weathered cottage that would now serve as his home. The structure showed signs of age and neglect, but it offered a quiet sanctuary at the edge of the forest, marking the beginning of his life among the villagers. The morning sun illuminates a sturdy stone tower, its conical roof reaching toward the clear sky as a new day begins in the village. Inside, the young girl stirs from her sleep, rubbing her eyes as she sits up in bed. Beside her, the massive form of the dark ogre remains deep in slumber on the floor, his heavy breathing filling the small room. She gazes around the unfamiliar surroundings, a look of wonder crossing her face as she realizes they are no longer in the dark place they once were, but are finally out in the world. A delicate butterfly flutters through a crack in the wooden wall, catching her attention. She smiles, remembering that they have finally moved to a new home. The insect lands right on the ogre's snout, causing him to snort and twitch in his sleep. He lets out a thunderous sneeze that startles the girl, though she can't help but watch his clumsy awakening with amusement as he finally opens his eyes. Suddenly, a violent tremor shakes the very foundations of the village, sending debris flying as the peace of the morning is shattered by an unexpected shock. Elsewhere, several pairs of feet march steadily through the undergrowth of a lush forest. They move with purpose, the scholar carrying her basket, the hooded adventurer leading the way, and a knight in silver armor bringing up the rear as they navigate the dense woods. She expresses her deep misgivings to her companion, questioning the elder's judgment in allowing a member of the demon race to reside within their village. The blonde elf sighs, tasking the scholar with guiding the newcomers through the forest and explaining the local rules the following day, though her eyes betray a lingering distrust. In response, the scholar offers a more measured perspective, noting the surprising nature of the situation. She reveals that the young girl is actually the child of a former hero, a student of the elder, and the ogre, a romance that seems almost like something out of a legend. Continuing her thought, the bespectacled elf suggests that perhaps the ogre isn't as fearsome as he appears. She reminds her friend that he was the one who stepped forward to protect everyone when it mattered most. This optimism only fuels the blonde warrior's frustration, as she warns that such a positive outlook might be dangerous. She points out that many in the village are far from convinced by the elder's decree, herself included, but her argument is suddenly cut short by a thunderous explosion echoing through the trees. Startled by the violent noise, the three women turn their gaze toward the source, the windmill hut. Panic flickers in the blonde elf's eyes as she wonders aloud if the ogre has finally lost control and begun a rampage. They rush toward the site, only to find a scene of utter devastation where the structure once stood. The windmill has been reduced to a chaotic heap of splintered wood and shattered stone, a cloud of dust still hanging heavy in the air. Reaching the edge of the ruins, the warrior cries out in disbelief at the sight of the destroyed home. Her heart races, fearing the worst for the child and the village. However, the tension evaporates as they find a massive ogre standing amidst the wreckage, looking more sheepish than aggressive as he rubs the back of his neck. Beside him, The young girl is doubled over in fits of laughter, explaining to the bewildered onlookers that the entire house collapsed simply because the ogre let out a single, powerful sneeze. She peeks out from behind the massive, dark-skinned figure of the ogre, her small frame a stark contrast to his imposing presence. The two elves stand before them, beads of sweat rolling down their faces as they process the destruction and the sudden appearance of the child. Still clinging to the ogre's leg, the young girl watches the strangers with wide, inquisitive eyes, her initial fear giving way to a quiet curiosity. Sensing her hesitation, the ogre gently rests a massive hand on her head, his voice low and encouraging as he explains that these are the kind souls who helped her recover from her sickness. He asks if she is ready to offer them a proper greeting, prompting the elves to watch with bated breath. Encouraged by his words, she steps out from her hiding spot with newfound confidence, announcing her name and age with a bright, energetic smile that lights up her face. She proudly declares that she is Nanoa and that she is 4 years old. With a formal air, the child bends low in a deep, respectful bow, politely asking the two stunned elves for their friendship and guidance in the days to come. This display of pure innocence strikes the two women like a physical blow, leaving them flushed and breathless as they struggle to contain their overwhelming adoration for the small girl. As the tension breaks amidst the ruins, the ogre praises her for her manners, while the scholar finally finds her voice, introducing herself as Estelle and her sister as Alicia to their new young companion. The scholar offers a warm, welcoming smile, which the girl returns with a joyful grin, though the blonde elf remains frozen in a state of sheer, blushing bewilderment at the child's charm. She observed the group with a quiet smile, but her companion Alicia did not share her ease. Alicia couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease as she watched the young girl, reminding herself that despite her innocent appearance, the child was half demon, and there was no telling what her true nature might be. Her hand tightened into a firm fist at her side as she steeled her resolve. She knew she had to remain vigilant, regardless of the warmth the others showed toward the newcomer. In response to the heavy silence, the armored warrior stepped forward, explaining that the village elder had requested she guide the group through the surrounding woods. She urged everyone to prepare themselves for the journey ahead without delay. As they began their trek into the lush forest of blessings, the scholar took the opportunity to explain their way of life. She described how elves live in a delicate balance with nature, following strict rules to ensure they never take more than the forest can provide. She continued her lesson, gesturing to the vibrant greenery around them. By showing gratitude and respecting the natural order, she explained the forest would always provide for them in the form of game like rabbits and deer, though hunting was strictly a communal activity. She watched as the young girl's eyes lit up with excitement at the thought of seeing a rabbit. The scholar offered a gentle smile, agreeing that the small creatures were indeed quite charming. While the child's thoughts drifted toward a savory meal, the scholar clarified that while hunting was strictly regulated, gathering other resources was more flexible. She noted that they were free to harvest as many mushrooms as they needed for their journey. They soon reached a dense patch of fungi, where the knight carefully picked 2 specimens to show the group. She warned them that many mushrooms in these woods were poisonous and challenged the others to identify which of the 2 was safe to eat. She watched in stunned silence as the massive ogre reached out and snatched both mushrooms from her hand, popping them into his mouth without a second thought. He chewed them casually, declaring that both were perfectly edible, much to the horror of the blonde elf, who shrieked that both varieties were actually deadly poison. The scholar adjusted her glasses in a panic, frantically explaining that those specific fungi were used as lethal bait for bears, but her companion suddenly recalled a rumor that such toxins had no effect on the hardy physiology of orcs. Unfazed by the potential danger, the dark-skinned giant looked down with a somber expression, requesting to be taught the difference between the plants so he could ensure the young girl only consumed what was safe. Moved by his concern for the child, the warrior agreed to share her knowledge, leading the group deeper into the woods while the others watched the exchange with newfound respect. However, their peaceful lesson was being watched from the shadows by the village warriors, who glared through the trees with deep-seated hatred for the demon-kin in their midst. Nearby, the little girl sampled a cluster of dark berries from a pepper tree, her face contorting into a comical grimace as the sharp, tingling spice overwhelmed her senses. Oblivious to the tension, the scholar gestured toward a lush orchard ahead, her voice bright with excitement as she pointed out the abundance of fruit-bearing trees available for their harvest. She could only watch in silent wonder as the massive ogre found a moment of peace in a vibrant flower field. Adorned with a delicate crown and a lei of white blossoms, he stood still as a butterfly fluttered nearby, a gentle soul hidden within a monstrous frame. The scholar pauses by the riverbank, suggesting that the group stop for a midday meal. She notes that the waters are teeming with trout and char, and mentions that she has brought along plenty of seasonings to prepare a proper feast. She is soon joined by the young girl, who excitedly announces that the massive ogre intends to treat everyone to a meal himself. While the scholar is delighted, the blonde adventurer looks on with a mix of surprise and skepticism, wondering if such a creature even knows how to cook as he begins to wade into the shallow water. The massive ogre stands tall in the current, his eyes fixed on the movement beneath the surface. With a sudden, powerful motion, he raises his hand high above his head, preparing to strike. He slams his palm down into the river with devastating force, sending a massive geyser of water erupting into the air. This single, concussive blow sends a shockwave through the stream, causing dozens of stunned fish to float helplessly to the surface. The two elves watch the bounty with very different reactions. The scholar claps her hands in joy at the massive catch, while her companion remains wary, questioning what kind of delicacy an orc could possibly prepare from such a haul. He soon turns back toward them, his task complete, and gruffly announces that the food is ready for consumption. His creation is a stargazy hamburg, a rustic dish where the trout has been minced, flesh, bones, and organs alike, by the sheer crushing power of his grip, eschewing any artificial seasonings to rely solely on the natural flavors of the ingredients. He has even decorated the plate with the severed fish heads to give the meal a festive, party-like atmosphere. He had presented his creation, but the two elves could only stare in mute horror, their faces pale and their mouths agape at the sight of the mangled fish heads protruding from meat. Despite their revulsion, the young girl beamed with innocent joy as she offered a portion to the blonde adventurer, encouraging her to try the meal. She hesitated, her brow slick with sweat as she accepted the bowl, while her companion watched from behind with a look of pure dread. Stealing her nerves, the warrior took a tentative bite, but the crunch of bone and the bitter taste of entrails immediately sent a wave of nausea through her. Tears welled in her eyes as she forced herself to chew, the sensation of crushed scales and the stench of internal organs filling her mouth in a grotesque display of culinary failure. This was the final straw for the scholar, who stood up and shouted in a fit of righteous indignation, declaring that such a mess was an insult to the very concept of life and cooking. She turned her frustration toward the child, who was eating the dish with apparent relish, and insisted that the girl was merely being deceived by the ogre's strange ways. Taking command of the situation, the elf pointed a finger and announced that she would prepare a proper meal herself, demanding that the massive creature fetch 3 more fresh fish for her to use. She begins by meticulously preparing the fish, first removing the scales with care before gutting it and slicing it into clean fillets. Next, she grinds mountain pepper and salt into a fine powder, blending them with olive oil and the juice of freshly gathered fruits to create a fragrant marinade. She then submerges the fillets in this seasoned liquid, allowing the flavors to penetrate the delicate flesh. Moving to the heat, she places the fish skin side down on a hot stone, searing it until the exterior is perfectly crisp before declaring the dish complete. Her creation is a masterpiece of elven culinary skill, herb grilled trout with a dragon-inspired twist. The dish boasts a perfectly crispy skin and fluffy, tender meat, seasoned with a bold saltiness and the sharp kick of wild garlic gathered from the riverbank. With the meal ready, she offers a portion to the young girl, who is immediately captivated by the enticing aroma. Encouraged by the elven women, the child takes a tentative, eager bite, her eyes widening as she tastes the food. She experiences an explosion of flavor so intense that it sends her into a state of pure, cosmic shock, her very hair bristling as her senses are overwhelmed by the quality of the cooking. Staring wide-eyed into the distance, she finally confronts a harsh truth. The meals her father had been providing were, in fact, utterly revolting. She continues to eat with gusto, oblivious to the internal crisis she has sparked. Beside her, the massive ogre stands frozen, his eyes wide with a realization that shakes his very soul. After finishing her meal, the little girl lets out a long, satisfied yawn, her eyes fluttering as the food coma begins to set in. Her guardian, however, remains slumped in defeat, his spirit crushed by the revelation of his own culinary inadequacy. Seeing her exhaustion, the blonde elf leans in with a gentle smile, noting that it's no wonder she's tired after such a hearty feast. The scholar beside her watches on, her expression soft as she observes the child's peaceful state. As they prepare to depart, the scholar suggests that since they have finished their tour of the area, it is time to head back to the safety of the village. The ogre carefully lifts the drowsy child into his arms, his movements heavy with a newfound sense of guilt. The group makes their way back through the sun-dappled forest, the silence of the woods punctuated only by their footsteps. The ogre walks at the rear, cradling the sleeping girl against his chest, his mind clearly elsewhere. He finally breaks his silence, a quiet apology escaping his lips as he looks down at the child. The weight of his past mistakes, the countless terrible meals he unknowingly forced upon her, presses heavily on his conscience. His thoughts drift back to the warrior who had once praised his cooking, remembering how she had eaten his offerings with apparent joy. He had always believed his food was a gift, a source of strength for his companions. However, the memory is tainted by the scholar's realization. The warrior had only enjoyed it because it was better than the wretched rations of the human army. The scholar can only wonder in horror what kind of foul substances the soldiers must have been consuming if his cooking tasted like fresh organs to them. She bows her head in a sincere apology, expressing regret for dismissing the culinary traditions of his kind without understanding. Zaid listens in silence, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small scholar. Looking down at the sleeping child in his arms, he admits his limitations, explaining that his knowledge is confined to the ways of orcs. He realizes that he alone cannot provide the upbringing a human child requires. As he gazes at her peaceful face, he acknowledges the human blood within her, which grants her the potential to live among her own kind. The two companions watch the exchange, their expressions softening as they witness the depth of the ogre's concern for his ward. Turning his intense gaze toward the blonde adventurer, he makes a humble request. He asks her to teach him the ways of humans, their food, their clothing, and their customs. She meets his eyes, her initial surprise giving way to a look of earnest commitment. Standing tall amidst the trees, he declares his desire for the girl to have the freedom to choose her own path, which necessitates her being raised with an understanding of her human heritage. A warm smile spreads across the scholar's face as she readily agrees, reminding him that they are all companions from the same village and bound by a common purpose. Her eyes shimmer with a newfound sense of duty and affection, reflecting a deep-seated resolve to support this unconventional family. She recalls the image of a noble elf warrior, his expression heavy with the weight of duty as he vows to fight for the future of his people, a memory that still carries a sharp sting. His memory lingers as the young elf's face contorts with a mix of grief and resentment, her voice a mere whisper as she laments the unfairness of the sacrifices made by those who came before. Beside her, the scholar watches in silence, her eyes filled with a quiet sympathy as she witnesses her companion's composure begin to crumble under the weight of past trauma. Her companion's gaze snaps toward the massive figure standing nearby, her eyes wide with a sudden, sharp realization that cuts through her sorrow like a blade. She lashes out with a voice trembling with rage, accusing the dark-skinned ogre of being the one who took her father's life, while the small child in his arms looks on in startled confusion. The sudden outburst terrifies the little girl, who bursts into a loud, heart-wrenching wail that echoes through the quiet forest clearing, shattering the tense silence. The child's distress is the final straw for the elf, who turns and bolts into the woods in a fit of guilt and shame, leaving the scholar to offer a hurried apology to the weeping girl. Leaving her friend to flee, the scholar turns back to the ogre and offers a soft, regretful apology, explaining that the girl was deeply attached to the father she lost, making the wound of his passing still very raw. The massive ogre stands in silence, his glowing eyes fixed on the sobbing child. He understands now just how much the young girl treasures the elf who fled, a bond that transcends the bitterness of the past. While he contemplates the child's grief, she sits alone deep within the quiet of the woods, the weight of her words pressing down on her. She berates herself for her cruelty, realizing the pain she caused by lashing out in front of such an innocent soul. She is suddenly jolted from her self-reflection by a familiar voice calling her name, breaking the heavy silence of the forest. She looks up in disbelief to find a group of her own kin standing before her, their faces etched with a complex mix of sorrow and resolve. They begin to speak, their voices trembling with long-held grief. One woman cries out that no matter what the elders say, she cannot forgive the monsters who took her husband and son. Beside her, a man confesses that he had been stalking the ogre through the trees, his heart filled with a murderous intent, waiting for the right moment to strike. He closes his eyes, his voice dropping to a low, somber tone as he admits that despite his opportunity, he found himself unable to strike. He explains that watching the ogre interact with the child changed everything. Seeing the genuine care and protection the beast offered made him realize the depth of the creature's heart and how much he truly values that bond. Alicia can only stare, her breath catching as the foundation of her hatred begins to crumble. As he finishes his confession, she remains frozen, tears welling in her eyes as the truth of his words sinks in, forcing her to confront the reality of the being she had so quickly condemned. She stands silently as the scarred warrior voices the collective turmoil of the village, admitting that recognizing the ogre's humanity has made their hatred impossible to maintain, leaving them uncertain of how to proceed. Wiping the tears from her face, she finds her resolve and addresses the gathered elves, asking for their attention to hear a proposal that might bridge the divide between their people and monsters. The sun hangs over the distant peaks, casting long shadows across the valley as the village's decision begins to take shape in the quiet of the forest. Back at the clearing, the massive ogre and the small girl are struck with sudden bewilderment as she points toward their dwelling with wide, disbelieving eyes. Their once ruined stone tower has been transformed, its walls mended, and its roof restored to a state of wholeness, prompting the girl to cry out in joy at the sight of their rebuilt home. As they marvel at the structure, A group of elves emerges from the tree line, led by the blonde adventurer and the scarred warrior who explains that while the exterior is finished, the inside remains empty. Overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of so many strangers, the child instinctively retreats, seeking safety behind the ogre's massive frame as the elves approach. Seeing the girl's fear, the blonde elf kneels to meet her gaze, offering a sincere apology for her harsh words from the day before and acknowledging that her anger was misplaced. She stands among her kin as the scarred warrior speaks for them all, admitting that their past actions were cruel and unjustified. Facing the massive ogre, the elves explain that this new dwelling serves as both an apology and a token of gratitude for his protection, a sincere gesture of welcome into their community. While the blonde adventurer remains silent, the dark-skinned giant stares back in disbelief, questioning if they can truly find it in their hearts to forgive someone like him. She looks toward her companions and admits that she doesn't have a simple answer, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. With a soft but firm expression, she explains her personal conviction. She refuses to be the kind of adult who would ever berate a parent in front of their child. Hearing these words, the young girl looks up, her large eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and burgeoning hope. The scarred warrior breaks the tension with a boisterous claim, promising to build a home so sturdy that not even the ogre's strongest sneeze could budge it, and insists they stay with the village chief for the 3 days construction will take. As the group begins to disperse, the young girl suddenly calls out, catching the blonde elf's attention. She watched as the young girl beamed with joy, her mouth wide in a toothy grin as she shouted her thanks for the repairs to their home. With a deep, respectful bow, the child expressed her sincere gratitude, her small frame trembling with the weight of her appreciation. This display of pure innocence left the gathered villagers in a stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of surprise and burgeoning warmth. Among them, the blonde adventurer stood frozen, her eyes wide as she processed the child's heartfelt gesture, while the others looked on with a newfound sense of unity. A wave of relief and joy finally broke over her, and a radiant smile spread across her face. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears of happiness, the previous tension and guilt finally washing away as she realized the bridge between their peoples was truly being built. As the work on the sturdy stone and timber house continued, the air was filled with the sounds of construction and a shared sense of purpose. The gratitude was mutual, a quiet acknowledgement that this new beginning was a gift for everyone involved, as the village worked together to finish the home that would house their new companions. The massive figure sits before a stone tower, his powerful frame hunched over a wooden stump as he methodically processes a pile of logs. With a display of raw, effortless strength, he snaps a thick piece of timber in two, the wood splintering under the pressure of his hands before he tosses the fragments onto a growing heap. Watching from a short distance, the village men marvel at the display, one noting that his pace easily matches the work of 10 ordinary laborers. Approaching the giant, the elder warrior requests further assistance, explaining that once the wood is split, they will need help transporting building materials to replace the warehouse lost to the recent fires. The silent titan offers a simple, affirming nod. Heaving a massive bundle of logs onto his shoulder, the dark-skinned warrior moves with a grace that belies his immense weight. The elder observes his departure, confident that the village's reconstruction will be completed far sooner than expected thanks to such incredible strength, while a small pair of eyes watches the scene from the shadows of the nearby forest. Peeking from behind the rough bark of a tree, a young elf girl stares with wide, sparkling eyes, her expression filled with a quiet, burgeoning wonder. As he promises to return shortly, she softly whispers a title of respect for the one who has become the village's unlikely protector. The young boy stands in awe, his mind replaying the image of the massive warrior striking down a skeletal foe. He can't help but think how incredibly cool the display of power was, his face flushing with admiration. His eyes sparkle with a newfound ambition as he clenches his small fists. He yearns to become just like the one they call the orc, a man who is strong, dependable, and admired by everyone in the village. Watching from a distance, he observes the giant effortlessly hauling a stack of heavy logs through the forest. He wonders what secret training leads to such strength and desperately wishes he could ask to become his apprentice. Yet he remains rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the massive figure halts and glances back, his sharp instincts picking up on the small presence. The boy recoils in a panic, his heart leaping into his throat as those glowing eyes scan the area. The warrior remains puzzled for a moment, sensing someone but seeing no one, while the boy remains pressed against a tree trunk, his chest heaving with the rapid, audible thumping of his heart. Peeking out from his hiding spot, the youth feels a wave of intimidation wash over him. Despite his deep admiration, the sheer presence of the ogre is terrifying, making it impossible for him to find the courage to step forward and speak. While the boy hides, a group of village men, including the scarred warrior and an elder wearing an eye patch, approach the ogre. They call out to Zaid, asking if he is familiar with a creature known as the Greed Grizzly. They explain that while patrolling the woods, they discovered troubling signs of the beast's presence. They warned that the greed grizzly is a notoriously violent and gluttonous monster, and its markings were found dangerously close to the village. He listened as the warriors explained that the creature was no ordinary local threat, but a high-level monster that had likely migrated from the northern dungeons. Its mere presence was enough to destabilize the entire forest's ecosystem, leaving the men visibly shaken by the potential devastation. They turned to him with a formal request, admitting that while they would typically rely on Alicia for such tasks, they were certain that only his overwhelming power could guarantee a swift, one-hit victory. They pleaded with him to track down and eliminate the beast before it could do more harm. He scratched his head, absorbing the weight of their words as they reiterated that his unique strength was the village's best chance for survival. The gravity of the situation was clear. The monster was a threat they simply couldn't handle on their own. He gave a curt nod of acceptance, agreeing to take on the hunt. Relieved, the villagers offered to lighten his load, insisting on carrying the heavy timber back themselves so that he could set off immediately to deal with the looming threat. Nearby, the young boy's excitement reached a fever pitch as he realized the ogre was actually going on a monster hunt. He couldn't contain his joy, jumping up and down at the thought of witnessing such a legendary display of power. His eyes shone with pure adoration, fixed on a massive figure he so deeply admired. The chance to see a real hero in action was a dream come true, and his heart raced with the thrill of the upcoming adventure. However, a sudden wave of anxiety washed over him as he considered the consequences of sneaking off. He knew his sisters would be furious if he went into the forest alone, but he quickly steeled his resolve, telling himself that a true man couldn't let fear hold him back from his path. Determined to learn the secret of true strength, he watched from the shadows as the ogre departed. He made a silent vow to follow, hoping that by observing the hunt, he might finally find the courage and power he so desperately sought. He watched as the young girl peeked from behind a wall, her eyes fixed on the massive figure of her brother. She whispered about how he was always chasing after something, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity as she wondered what he was up to this time. This reminded her of the times they spent together, playing simple games where the giant would pretend to be caught, his terrifying appearance softened by his gentle nature toward the children. Back in the present, the boy moved cautiously through the woods, noting the eerie silence that had fallen over the forest. Ahead of him, the girl ran with reckless abandon, her voice echoing through the trees as she complained about being left out of the hunt. Deep within the thicket, the massive warrior continued his steady march, his presence alone enough to still the local wildlife. His gaze was sharp and focused, scanning the environment for any sign of the beast he had been tasked to eliminate. Upon reaching a clearing, the boy's breath hitched as he discovered deep, savage claw marks gouged into a massive boulder. He realized with a start that the forest animals weren't just quiet. They were hiding in terror from the beast that had left such a mark. Yet the warrior sat calmly atop the very same stone. Ignoring the potential danger, the giant reached for a large wooden chest he had brought along, his movements deliberate and calm. From his hiding spot behind a thick trunk, the boy watched intently, realizing that the warrior intended to make his stand right here. He surmised that the chest must contain the weapons and traps necessary to face such a formidable foe. He watches in stunned silence as the massive ogre reaches into the chest, not for a weapon, but for a pair of delicate crochet hooks. His eyes widen in utter disbelief at the sight of the fearsome warrior settling down in the middle of the woods with a knitting kit. He remembers Estelle mentioning how handy simple knitting can be, but seeing Zaid so relaxed in the heart of a predator's territory, as if he were in his own home, is beyond his comprehension. The boy trembles as he recalls reading about the greed grizzly, a beast with claws that shred iron and hide that deflects cannon fire. He wonders if even an ogre can survive such a monster while completely unarmed. In contrast to his fear, the ogre remains perched on a boulder, his needles clicking rhythmically as small rabbits begin to peek out from the tall grass. He sits motionless as the forest's inhabitants lose their fear entirely, with birds and squirrels flocking to the massive, peaceful figure as he focuses on his craft. Watching the scene, the child wonders why the creatures that were once in hiding are now drawn to the very being he thought was a monster. He finally understands that Zaid's gentle and dignified presence is a source of comfort for all, as the ogre's calm expression reveals a reliable side that the boy never expected to see. He gazes out with wide, shimmering eyes, struck by a profound sense of admiration. In this moment, he sees the true essence of what it means to be a man, a realization that fills him with a quiet, reverent awe. Peeking from behind the rough bark of a tree, he begins to wonder about his own lineage. He thinks of the father who passed away before he was even born, imagining if that man possessed the same quiet strength he sees now. As he remains lost in these contemplative thoughts, he wonders if his father ever wore such a reliable expression. Nearby, the young girl approaches stealthily, her face lit with a playful, mischievous grin that contrasts with his somber reflection. The silence is shattered when she suddenly lunges forward, tagging him with a triumphant shout of victory. The sudden contact sends him into a panicked yelp, his composure vanishing instantly. The commotion startles the nearby wildlife, sending birds fluttering into the air and drawing a surprised glance from the massive ogre. Undeterred by the chaos she caused, the girl throws her arms up in celebration, laughing at her successful ambush while the boy can only stammer in shock. The young elf boy gasped, his eyes wide with shock as he stumbled upon the unexpected. He stammered, questioning how the massive orc could possibly be here in this place. Just then, the small girl appeared beside him, her expression one of innocent confusion. She assumed they were playing a game of hide-and-seek and eagerly asked to be included in the fun. He quickly tried to quiet her, his heart hammering against his ribs as he explained that he hadn't been playing at all, even if it looked that way. The tall grass around them rustled ominously, signaling they were not alone. Beads of sweat rolled down his neck as he fretted over the consequences of his actions. He knew he would be in deep trouble if anyone found out he had been secretly following the others. Glancing nervously to the side, he searched for a way out, his anxiety mounting with every passing second. The source of the rustling finally revealed itself. A colossal, muscular bear with a jagged white cross scarred into its chest. It towered over the boy, a silent and terrifying wall of fur and muscle. As the beast loomed, the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. This was no person, but a true monster. Beside him, the girl stared up in frozen silence at the sheer scale of the predator. The bear let out a deafening, bone-chilling roar that sent the boy scrambling backward in pure terror. In a desperate, futile attempt at defense, the little girl bared her own teeth and growled, trying to look as fierce as the monster threatening them. She stands small but defiant, her tiny frame a fragile barrier between the monstrous predator and her companion. The bear, a mountain of dark fur and scarred flesh, looms over her, its presence suffocating. It stares back with glowing, pitiless eyes, its breath a low, guttural rumble that vibrates through the very air. The beast's hunger is palpable, a primal force focused entirely on the two children. Seeing the danger, the young boy fumbles with a small, ornate wand, his hands shaking so violently he can barely maintain his grip. Despite the terror threatening to paralyze him, he forces himself to stand firm, his eyes wide with a desperate resolve. He screams a command, channeling every ounce of his will into the focus in his hand, and a burst of searing flame erupts, striking the beast squarely in its face. The impact is sudden and bright, momentarily masking the creature in a shroud of fire and smoke. However, the attack only serves to further enrage the monster, which lashes out with a massive, razor-sharp claw. Realizing the gravity of their situation, he shouts for his friend to run, urging her to find her father while he attempts to hold the line. He tries to conjure a protective barrier, but the realization hits him with cold finality. He is far too slow. As the bear's shadow engulfs him, a sense of impending doom washes over the boy, and he braces for an end that seems inevitable. Suddenly, a massive fist crashes into the bear's side, sending the beast reeling back with a surprised roar. The children look up in shock and relief as their powerful protector, the dark-skinned ogre, interposes himself between them and the predator. He meets the bear's neck strike head-on, his muscular arms absorbing the force of the blow with a dull thud. The forest floor trembles as the two titans clash, the ogre's strength pitted against the raw, animalistic fury of the scarred beast. He grits his teeth, sweat pouring down his brow as the physical strain of the confrontation reaches its peak. Facing the massive beast, he matches its ragged breathing. Both combatants momentarily paused in a deadly stalemate of exhaustion and intent. With a sudden, explosive burst of strength, he lunges forward and delivers a crushing blow to the bear's skull, sending the creature crashing into the earth. As the dust settles, he stands victorious over the motionless predator, checking himself for wounds. Seeing him victorious, the young boy collapses onto the grass, his legs giving way as the paralyzing fear finally begins to ebb, replaced by a flood of tearful relief. Sometime later, the violence of the forest is replaced by the gentle lapping of water against a riverbank, where a small camp has been established with a crackling fire and laundry drying in the breeze. Having washed in the river, the boy looks down in shame as the massive warrior questions his reasons for following him into such danger. He stammers, feeling humiliated by his own perceived weakness and the recklessness of his actions. He eventually finds his voice, confessing that his true desire was to become strong, just like the one who had saved them. Continuing his plea, the youth explains that with his father gone, he is the only man left to protect his family, and he begs to be taken on as an apprentice to learn the ways of a true warrior. He had just made his desperate plea, and a massive figure before him repeated the word with a note of genuine surprise, as if the idea of taking a student had never crossed his mind. Seeing the hesitation, The boy's resolve began to crumble as tears welled in his eyes. He stammered that someone as weak and pathetic as him, someone who had even lost control of his own body in fear, could never truly become strong. The giant remained unmoved by the display of self-pity, crossing his massive arms and simply stating that he did not share that low opinion of the youth's character. Leaning in closer to meet the boy's gaze, the ogre questioned his memory of the recent struggle, asking if he hadn't been the one to stand firm and protect Nanoa when it mattered most. While the youth insisted he had accomplished nothing of value, the little girl nearby burst with excitement, recounting how her big brother had been incredible and describing the explosive power of the magic that had saved them from the beast. Taking these words to heart, the warrior explained that true strength in a man is not measured by raw power or physical dominance, but by the courage to act in the face of overwhelming odds. This revelation struck the boy like a physical blow, his eyes widening as the weight of the giant's wisdom began to sink in and reshape his understanding of himself. With a final, heavy hand placed gently on the boy's head, the ogre expressed his gratitude and invited him to visit his home as a guest rather than following him in the shadows, finally acknowledging him by name. He begins to walk away, his massive frame silhouetted against the distant mountains. Behind him, the young boy's face lights up with pure, unadulterated joy as he shouts a title of respect, claiming him as a mentor. The ogre, however, grumbles a dry correction, noting that he never actually agreed to take on a disciple. Leaving the boy to his excitement, the sturdy wooden structures of the village center stand silent under the afternoon sun, marking a brief moment of calm. Inside the quiet hall, the blonde elf expresses her gratitude, noting how much his swift work has helped the community. Beside her, the scholar with glasses bows her head in apology, lamenting the trouble her younger brother has caused and promising to discipline him for his impulsiveness. He speaks up in the boy's defense, suggesting that she shouldn't be too hard on him, as he is a man in the making despite his youth. The scholar softens her expression, conceding that crushing a young man's pride is indeed unwise, and she resolves to keep her scolding moderate. As they stand before the seated elder, the conversation turns toward the future. The old man observes that while the ogre's strength is invaluable for rebuilding, it seems a waste to confine such power solely to manual labor within the village walls. Seizing the moment, the blonde warrior leans in with a spark of curiosity in her eyes. She poses a life-changing question, asking if he would consider putting his formidable skills to use as an adventurer in the nearby town. The journey leads to the sprawling port city of Croft, a bustling hub of stone buildings and maritime activity nestled against the sea. Within the city walls, the streets are alive with the movement of citizens going about their daily lives amidst the grand architecture. A faint magical resonance lingers in the air, manifesting as a complex, glowing geometric seal upon the cobblestones. Arriving at their destination, the blonde elf announces with a bright smile that they have reached the port town of Croft. She explains that while it served as a vital military base during the Great War, extensive expansions have transformed it into a thriving center for trade and logistics. As they walk through the crowded thoroughfares, she notes that the influx of wealth and people inevitably brings its share of conflict and trouble. She continues, her expression earnest, as she explains that with the national army depleted by years of conflict, the responsibility of protecting the common folk has fallen to those known as adventurers. Turning to her massive companion, she proposes that he work as an adventurer himself. Though he questions if an orc would be accepted in such a role, she reassures him confidently, revealing that she had the blacksmith Lauren prepare something specifically for this situation. To solve the problem of his identity, he dons a heavy, silver knight's helmet, its visor concealing his face while allowing his horns to protrude, effectively masking his monstrous nature. He walked beside Alicia through the bustling streets of Croft, his massive frame drawing curious glances despite the heavy iron helmet. She whispered a reminder of their cover story. He was Orc San, a shy veteran of the Great War who concealed a hideous facial wound. She emphasized that under no circumstances should he remove the headpiece, as it was essential for his safety in the city. As they reached a storefront labeled as an elven magic shop, she paused to give him further instructions. She asked him to wait there while she completed a delivery her sister had requested, promising to return quickly so they could head to the Adventurers Guild together. After she departed, the armored giant felt the weight of every passing gaze, his presence far more conspicuous than he had hoped. His internal unease was suddenly interrupted by a sharp cry of distress from a nearby alleyway, where a small crowd had begun to gather around a brewing conflict. The source of the commotion was a man with jagged hair who was cornering a young woman. She pleaded for him to stop, her voice trembling with discomfort, but he merely scoffed at her resistance, claiming his invitation for tea was being met with an ungrateful and disrespectful attitude. His companion stepped forward to bolster his ego, loudly identifying him as Gino, a B-rank adventurer and former soldier of the National Army. Gino himself gestured to a scar on his cheek, boasting that it was a badge of honor earned while fighting on the front lines of the Great War. He continued his tirade, looking down on the townspeople and declaring that he had bled to protect such weaklings from the horrors of war. He argued that, as an adventurer, he was still their protector and demanded to know why he wasn't receiving the absolute gratitude he felt he deserved. He watched as she stammered, her face pale and sweating as she tried to navigate the terrifying situation. She managed to offer a word of thanks for his service, but desperately explained that she was currently in the middle of her working hours and simply could not leave her post. Unmoved by her plea, he reached out and gripped her chin firmly, his expression turning predatory and cruel. He sneered that if she were truly grateful, she would show it through her actions rather than words, while his cohorts looked on with mocking amusement, encouraging his harassment. He lets out a confused grunt, his arrogant expression faltering as a massive shadow suddenly falls over him. Looming over the adventurer is a titan in iron, a figure so immense that the sunlight is blotted out entirely. The sheer physical presence of the newcomer leaves the man wide-eyed and paralyzed with sudden dread. Without a word to his challenger, the armored giant tells the young woman to flee while she has the chance. She offers a hurried word of thanks before vanishing into the crowd, leaving the adventurer to stammer in disbelief at the sheer scale of the man now standing in his way. His companions react with outrage, demanding to know who this interloper thinks he is, but the giant remains unmoved. With a calm, almost pitying tone, the warrior points out the obvious truth. The girl clearly despised the adventurer's advances, a fact he seemed blissfully unaware of. Standing his ground in the center of the thoroughfare, the titan makes it clear he will not be intimidated by the group's posturing. The air grows heavy with tension as the crowd gathers, sensing the shift in power. The silence is broken not by a blade, but by a sudden burst of laughter from the onlookers. The adventurer's attempt at intimidation has backfired spectacularly, turning him into a laughingstock before the entire town. Mockery rains down from all sides, with townspeople calling him a fool and suggesting he find a mirror before ever trying to court someone again. He stands there, face flushed with a mixture of rage and deep embarrassment, as his reputation crumbles in real time. His eyes narrow into slits of pure venom, the humiliation curdling into a dangerous, silent promise of retribution. The public shaming has left a wound far deeper than any physical blow could have inflicted. He let his hand fall to the hilt of his blade, the metal cold against his palm as his temper flared. Unable to contain his rage, the adventurer lashed out, his boots splintering a nearby wooden crate into a shower of debris. His companions followed his lead, drawing their own weapons as he roared at the silent, armored figure to stand down. The stranger remained unmoved, the narrow slits of his helmet revealing nothing of the man beneath. The escalating confrontation was suddenly cut short by a sharp cry as a blonde elf stepped forward, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. She continued her rebuke, telling him to be ashamed of himself for drawing a sword in the middle of the street and threatening to report his behavior to the guild branch manager. With a sharp click, the adventurer begrudgingly returned his weapon to its sheath, the threat of official discipline cooling his immediate impulse for violence. He spat a final, venomous insult, calling her a filthy demi-human and warning her never to lecture a human again before turning his back on the scene. He and his companions retreat into the distance, their departure marked by the lingering sting of his insults. Nearby, the young villager watches with a mix of relief and lingering anxiety as the tension finally breaks. Turning her attention back to her companion, Alicia offers a sincere apology for her brief absence, wondering if her intervention had been an unwelcome intrusion. The massive warrior, his features now concealed behind a sturdy metal helm, reassures her that her help was actually quite welcome. She reacts with a modest smile, humbled by the gratitude of such a formidable figure. He continues, admitting that his hesitation to act was born of a strange dilemma. The agitator was so frail that any retaliation might have caused disproportionate harm, leading to unnecessary complications. This honest admission draws a light-hearted laugh from her. As they resume their walk, he questions her restraint in the face of such blatant disrespect. She explains with a weary grace that such encounters have become all too common since the Great War, and dwelling on them would be an endless, exhausting endeavor. Their path leads them to a grand, multi-story timber-framed building, the headquarters of the local Adventurers Guild Croft branch. Stepping inside, they are immediately greeted by the boisterous voice of the branch manager, who throws his arms up in a warm, enthusiastic welcome for the returning elf. She observes the unusual quiet of the hall, to which the manager sighs, noting that they are desperately short-handed and that he has been anxiously awaiting the promising newcomer she was rumored to be bringing. The guild manager examines the massive warrior before him, noting that while he senses no magical power, the man's physique is inhumanly impressive. He recognizes him from Alicia's report as Zaid, the one who defeated the bandit leader Ray. He laughs heartily, remarking that the warrior's build is so immense he's practically like an orc or a troll. Alicia joins in the laughter, while the silent giant remains stoic behind his helmet. Settling down, he prepares to conduct a brief interview, asking the simple but essential question of why he wants to become an adventurer. The warrior explains his motivation. He has a 4-year-old daughter and wants to ensure she lacks for nothing. When a manager asks if his wife is looking after her while he works away from home, the warrior somberly reveals that his wife has passed away and the child is currently in the care of an elven village chief. He listens as she quickly interjects to reassure the manager, explaining that Zaid won't actually be living in the town. She will be using teleportation magic to transport him back and forth. She watches as the manager nods, understanding the arrangement and looking over his notes to confirm there are no further issues on that front. However, his gaze lingers on the warrior's face, or rather, the lack of one. He leans forward, finally addressing the elephant in the room. He points out that since this is an interview, it would be appropriate for the candidate to remove his helmet so they can see his face. He waits for a response as the elf looks up at her companion with a slight, knowing smile, while the warrior remains motionless, the request hanging in the air. He remains silent for a long moment before finally admitting that he is simply shy, hoping this excuse will suffice to keep his identity hidden. His unexpected confession from such a massive, intimidating figure causes the guild manager to burst into a fit of laughter. The man doubles over, finding the contrast between the warrior's hulking physique and his timid personality absolutely hilarious, calling him an interesting fellow. Once he catches his breath, the manager gives a thumbs up, declaring that the interview portion of the registration is officially a success. Closing his ledger, he explains that while the interview is over, a practical skill test is still required by regulation, even if an A-rank adventurer like Alicia has vouched for him. He notes that while strength is evident, a formal demonstration is necessary. He then turns to the elf, asking if she would be willing to serve as the opponent for a mock battle, to which she readily agrees. She is suddenly caught off guard when a sharp voice calls out for them to wait before they can proceed with the test. While she processes the sudden interruption, Gino steps forward with a smug grin, suggesting that a fight between companions wouldn't be a proper test, and volunteering to evaluate the newcomer's strength himself. He stands firm in his challenge, forcing the guild manager to consider the unusual request. After a moment of contemplation, the elder man concedes, acknowledging that such an arrangement could serve as a suitable test. Alicia, however, can only mutter the challenger's name in a tone thick with frustration and concern. She watches as the manager claps his hands together, signaling his approval of the duel. He then directs the group toward the rear of the building, instructing both the seasoned adventurer and the newcomer to follow him to the training grounds where the matter can be settled properly. They emerge moments later into a wide, open courtyard beneath the watchful gaze of the town's clock tower. Birds scatter into the sky as the two combatants take their positions on the dirt, drawing their practice weapons while the manager and Alicia observe from safe distance. The guild manager stands between the two combatants, his voice steady as he lays out the terms of the engagement. He reminds them that this is merely a mock battle, and, while he trusts their skills, they must avoid inflicting any lasting harm. To his right, the spiky-haired adventurer draws his blade with a cocky grin, while the massive, helmeted figure stands like a silent monolith. With a sharp command and a swift drop of his hand, the official signals the start of the contest. The challenger lunges forward instantly, a guttural roar erupting from his throat as he puts his full weight behind a heavy opening swing. He closes the distance in a blur of motion, his smaller frame a stark contrast to the towering presence of the dark-skinned warrior who awaits the blow. From the sidelines, the elf and the manager watch the opening gambit unfold. She watches the exchange with a self-assured smile, whispering to herself that a seasoned fighter like her companion should have no trouble handling a mere orc. In her mind, the outcome is already decided. Her confidence seems justified as the adventurer unleashes a relentless barrage of strikes, his blade clashing against his opponent's guard with metallic rings. He taunts the silent giant, mocking his lack of response as he continues the assault. Despite the flurry of steel raining down upon him, the armored titan remains unfazed, the blows glancing off his sturdy frame without drawing a single flinch. Seeing the lack of progress, the elf's smug expression begins to falter, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Beside her, the manager observes that while the attack is relentless, it appears entirely ineffective against the immovable force before them. She watches as the massive warrior effortlessly evades the frantic swings of his opponent. With a casual step, the dark-skinned giant avoids a horizontal slash that would have felled a lesser man, his movements fluid and controlled despite his size. Seeing his attacks fail to land cleanly, the spiky-haired challenger begins to jeer, mocking the giant's hesitant posture. He manages to land a strike against the armored chest, but the impact is hollow, eliciting only a wide, arrogant grin from the attacker as he continues his verbal assault. Within the confines of his heavy helmet, the giant remains silent, his posture radiating a strange sense of uncertainty rather than fear. He seems to be contemplating his next move, or perhaps the lack of one, as the sounds of the guild hall fade into the background of his focus. Observing the exchange from the sidelines, the blonde elf suddenly grasps the truth of the situation. She realizes that the giant isn't struggling to defend himself. Rather, he is paralyzed by the fear that even the slightest counterblow would cause irreparable harm to his fragile opponent. She clutches her head in a mixture of frustration and disbelief at the absurdity of the mismatch. Beside her, the guild manager sighs, noting that while being humble is a virtue, the giant's extreme reluctance to use his strength makes him difficult to employ as a standard adventurer. Unaware of the mercy being shown to him, the arrogant swordsman continues to spit insults, calling his opponent a useless hunk of meat. He stands tall, convinced of his own superiority, while the giant simply towers over him, absorbing the verbal abuse without a word of protest. Leaning in close with a sneer that twists his scarred face, the challenger delivers a final, biting ultimatum. He declares that cowards have no place in the guild and warns the giant never to cross his path again, his voice dripping with unearned contempt. As the mock battle concludes, the spiky-haired man turns his back and struts away, leaving the silent giant standing alone in the center of the room. The massive warrior looks down, his thoughts hidden behind the steel of his visor, as the weight of the encounter settles over the hall. The two combatants stand poised, the air thick with the tension of their unresolved duel. Seeing the stalemate, the blonde elf cries out to her companion, her voice cutting through the guild hall's murmurs while the manager tries in vain to quiet her. She screams with all her might, urging him that there is no need to actually defeat his opponent. He only needs to demonstrate the true extent of his strength to prove his worth. These words strike a chord, and behind the cold metal of his visor, a spark of understanding flickers. He shifts his stance, towering over the smaller man who watches with growing uncertainty as the atmosphere begins to change. A memory of a child's pure, joyful laughter suddenly fills his mind, her small hands reaching out in a gesture of absolute trust. Recalling how he once used his immense power only to bring happiness to that little girl, he makes a choice and lets his blade clatter to the floor. His opponent sneers, interpreting the gesture as a sign of surrender, but the ground itself groans and shatters as the ogre plants his foot with earth-shaking force. He stands motionless as a flurry of steel rains down upon him, the air filled with the frantic shouts of his opponent. Gino unleashes a desperate barrage of strikes, his blade a blur of motion against the silent giant. Each impact rings out with a dull thud, the sword bouncing harmlessly off his dark, iron-like skin. The relentless assault produces nothing but sparks, failing to leave even a single scratch on his massive frame. Suddenly, the sound of shattering metal cuts through the air as the adventurer's blade snaps in two. Gasping for breath and trembling with disbelief, the man stares at the jagged remains of his weapon, while the warrior he attacked remains completely unfazed. Refusing to accept defeat, he snarls in frustration and reaches for the backup blade at his hip. His eyes are wide with a mixture of rage and panic as he fumbles for another way to pierce the monster's hide. The small dagger proves just as useless, its tip pressing against the giant's chest without drawing a drop of blood. He screams at the silent figure, accusing him of arrogance even as his own attacks fail one after another. In a final, reckless gamble, he ignites his remaining power into a devastating fire technique known as the burn slash. From the sidelines, the manager watches in horror, shouting a warning as the guild hall is suddenly bathed in a violent, orange glow. A massive explosion erupts, engulfing the dark warrior in a pillar of flame and smoke that shakes the very foundations of the building. The manager winces at the destruction, fearing that the reckless adventurer has finally gone too far in his desperate attempt to win. As the smoke clears, he stands tall and unscathed, the only sign of the blast being a small crack in his heavy helmet. With a voice that rumbles like distant thunder, he calmly remarks that the inferno felt merely warm. He reached out with his massive, dark hands, seizing the arrogant adventurer by the shoulders before the man could even process what was happening. Gino could only utter a confused gasp as the giant's grip tightened, pinning him in place. With effortless strength, the ogre hoisted his captive high into the air, his back turned to the onlookers who watched in stunned silence. The sheer scale of the creature's power was on full display as he prepared his next move. Suddenly, the warrior launched the man skyward with a violent heave. Gino felt the ground vanish beneath him, his mind racing in a panic as he realized he was soaring higher and higher without any sign of slowing down, wondering just how far he would go. The world below shrank rapidly until the entire town was laid out like a miniature map beneath his flailing limbs. The wind whipped past him, a cold reminder of the terrifying altitude he had reached in a matter of seconds. At the very apex of his trajectory, he hung suspended for a heartbeat, sweat pouring down his face as he begged for the ascent to end. The silence of the heights was broken only by his own ragged, terrified breathing as he realized the climb had finally stopped. Gravity finally reclaimed its prize, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stared down at the distant cobblestones of the guild square, his mind screaming in denial at the lethal plunge that awaited him. He plummeted headfirst, a streak of pure terror cutting through the air as he wailed in absolute despair. The ground rushed up to meet him, and he shrieked a final, desperate plea for a life he was certain was about to end in a bloody mess. Just inches from a gruesome impact, the dark giant caught him by the ankle, leaving him dangling helplessly like a discarded doll. As Gino hung there, dazed and foaming at the mouth from sheer shock, the ogre peered down at him through his helm and calmly asked if he wanted to go for another round. He leaves the arrogant adventurer twitching on the cobblestones, a broken shell of a man foaming at the mouth after the terrifying ordeal. Watching the display, the guild manager erupts in a boisterous laughter, thoroughly entertained by the sheer absurdity of the power he just witnessed. He commends the masked warrior's incredible physical strength, marveling at how a human could be launched so high without the use of a single spell. Beside them, the blonde elf can only stare in disbelief, her voice trembling as she questions whether such a feat is even possible for a mortal man. The silent giant turns his head away, his stoic mask hiding any hint of emotion, prompting the manager to chuckle and label him a shy fellow. The elf watches the exchange with a mix of amusement and lingering shock at the casual nature of their conversation. Continuing his assessment, the manager notes that it isn't just raw power that makes the warrior formidable. His defensive capabilities are equally astounding, having withstood direct magical attacks without sustaining so much as a scratch. With a satisfied nod, he declares that the warrior has passed his evaluation without question. He expresses how reassuring it is to have such a capable individual join their ranks, especially during a period of such intense activity for the guild. Raising a finger to emphasize the urgency, the manager informs the pair that he already has a specific assignment ready for them to undertake immediately. He reveals that the request comes from the St. Cross Church, a prestigious organization known for leading the unified human forces during the ancient Great Demon War. He continued to explain the gravity of the situation, noting that the request was a top priority for the St. Cross Church, requiring their absolute best efforts. Alicia listened with wide-eyed focus, her expression shifting to one of serious concern as the weight of the mission became clear. Beside her, Zaid remained silent, his features hidden behind his new metal helm, absorbing the details of the task ahead. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows across the intricate timber-framed buildings of the city district. A horse-drawn carriage makes its way along a winding dirt path, flanked by lush trees as it heads toward the distant, snow-capped peaks. The vehicle rattles along the trail, its wooden wheels kicking up dust while the driver keeps a steady hand on the reins. Inside the cramped interior, the massive, dark-skinned warrior and his elven companion endure the bumpy ride, their bodies swaying with every jolt of the carriage. Upon reaching their destination, they are met by the guild manager, whose somber expression immediately signals that their arrival is met with urgent news. He begins to explain the dire situation, revealing that a fire dragon has taken up residence on the mountain pass to the south, the vital link to the capital. He recounts how a merchant caravan was recently decimated, leaving the trade route in peril. The news strikes them with a wave of disbelief, as they struggle to comprehend how such a formidable creature could have appeared so suddenly in this region. The manager elaborates, suggesting the beast is likely a remnant of the Demon King's former aerial forces that fled and turned feral after the Great War's conclusion. He concludes by detailing the official request from the St. Cross Church to secure the road for an upcoming visit, warning that this 20-meter adult dragon, capable of flight and devastating breath, will require every ounce of strength the local guild can muster. He had made the situation clear. While some refused to call, the rest of the guild was already mobilizing to establish a forward base for the dragon hunt. The timeline was dangerously tight, leaving only a week to prepare for an encounter with such a formidable foe. But there was no other choice but to proceed with the mission. As they walked away from the guild hall, she reflected on the manager's grim briefing, her brow furrowed with worry. A single week felt like a mere heartbeat when the opponent was a fire dragon, and the weight of the short preparation period pressed heavily upon her spirit. She continued to explain the tactical reality, noting that dragons typically follow set patrol routes, which usually allows for the construction of defensive lines and the placement of heavy cannons. However, with the clock ticking down, such luxuries were impossible, meaning the guild would have to brace for the brutal reality of close-quarters combat. The massive warrior remained silent, his gaze fixed forward as he processed the gravity of the upcoming mission. Behind the cold metal of his visor, his thoughts were unreadable, though the stillness of his posture suggested a deep, internal calculation. Sensing his preoccupation, she turned to ask if something was troubling him, unaware that he was currently weighing the specific objectives of their task. He wondered silently whether the goal was the absolute termination of the beast, or if simply driving it away from the trade route would suffice. He listened as she clarified that their primary mission was to ensure the safety of the route, which meant that forcing the dragon to retreat would be considered a success. While dragons lacked the complex civilizations of humans or demons, they were intelligent enough to learn. Once driven from a territory, they rarely risked returning to it. Despite this, she admitted that while slaying the creature would be the ideal outcome, achieving such a feat within their limited preparation window seemed nearly impossible. Her voice carried a hint of resignation as she acknowledged the daunting scale of the task ahead. Her concerns were met with a simple nod of understanding as they reached their transport, his stoic demeanor never wavering. Watching him, she couldn't help but wonder if even a warrior of his strength felt a flicker of anxiety at the prospect of facing a dragon in open combat. He sits beside Alicia in the carriage when a sudden, sharp realization strikes them both, shattering the quiet of their journey. Seeing thick plumes of smoke rising from the direction of their base, she snaps the reins with desperate urgency, her face pale with a growing sense of dread. The destination they reach is a scene of utter devastation, where the once organized camp has been reduced to smoldering ruins and scattered debris under a darkened sky. As the carriage rolls into the clearing, the true scale of the tragedy becomes clear. The bodies of fallen knights lie strewn across the blood-stained earth amidst the wreckage of their defenses. They stare out in stunned silence, the elf's breath hitching in her throat as she witnesses the horrific aftermath of the dragon's fury. Leaping from the vehicle, she quickly scans the area and, finding no sign of the beast, desperately calls for assistance to tend to the survivors scattered among the ruins. She rushes to the side of a severely injured man, her hands beginning to glow with soft light as she prepares to cast a healing spell to stabilize his fading life. The wounded warrior suddenly grips her arm, his eyes wide with raw terror as he screams a frantic warning that the monster has not left and is still lurking nearby. She froze as the air itself seemed to ripple and tear, revealing the monstrous form of the dragon looming directly over her. The beast had appeared without a sound, its massive claws ready to strike as it materialized from thin air. The creature towered over the ruins of the camp, its cold, reptilian eyes fixed on the small, vulnerable figures below. It moved with a terrifying grace, its presence suffocating the very air as it prepared to finish what it had started. Sweat beaded on her forehead as the realization hit her. This was no ordinary beast. It had used a sophisticated heat haze spell to bend light and remain invisible, a level of high-tier magical mastery that shouldn't be possible for a mere monster, suggesting it was something far more dangerous. Recognizing the imminent danger, she desperately tried to manifest a magical barrier, her hands trembling as she called out for a shield. The dragon, a specimen clearly trained for war, stared her down with predatory focus, unaffected by her attempt to defend herself. It unhinged its massive jaws, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth and a throat that seemed to swallow the light. The time for magic had run out. She knew she wouldn't be fast enough to complete the spell, but before the killing blow could land, a massive shadow eclipsed her. The ogre, now wearing a heavy-horned helmet, lunged forward with desperate strength, shoving her and the wounded Gino out of the path of the closing maw. The dragon's teeth came together with a bone-crushing snap, but its prize was not the elf. Instead, it had clamped its jaws around the muscular torso of the warrior who had thrown himself into harm's way to save his companions. With a sickening jerk, the beast hoisted its captive into the air, the warrior's limbs flailing as he was lifted off the ground, trapped within the dragon's crushing grip. He is trapped in the beast's maw, prompting a desperate cry from the elf on the ground. Alicia screams out for the orc, her face contorted in terror as she watches her protector seemingly devoured. Despite the crushing pressure, the warrior remains calm, assuring her that he is unharmed. With a display of raw, monstrous strength, he braces his arms against the dragon's teeth, prying the massive jaws apart from the inside. He leaps clear of the dragon's mouth with a nimble bound, landing safely on the grass. As he brushes himself off, he repeats his assurance with a confident tone, leaving the elf wide-eyed and speechless at his casual survival. The dragon, enraged by the escape, begins to gather a blinding light within its throat. A low, guttural growl vibrates through the air as the beast prepares to unleash its devastating breath, the energy crackling with lethal intent. Seeing the impending blast, she springs into action, thrusting her hand forward to weave a complex magical seal. She shouts the incantation for a force shield, manifesting a shimmering reaction barrier to intercept the coming onslaught. The dragon unleashes a searing beam of pure energy, but it slams harmlessly against the magical wall. The impact creates a violent vortex of wind and light, as the shield holds firm against the dragon's most powerful weapon. She knelt on the scorched earth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The effort of manifesting a reaction barrier had drained her, but it was the only way to neutralize the dragon's flames and protect the others from certain death. Before she could recover, the massive beast loomed ahead, its throat glowing once more as it prepared a follow-up strike. The elf's eyes widened in terror as she realized the dragon was already initiating its second movement. She knew her mana reserves were dangerously low. Another barrier of that magnitude would be impossible to maintain. Suddenly, a towering, muscular shadow fell over her as a massive figure stepped forward to face the threat. With a calm command to leave the rest to him, the armored giant met the dragon's devastating breath head-on, shattering the beam of energy with a single, earth-shaking punch. She stared in disbelief, her mind racing to comprehend how he had neutralized such a powerful attack using nothing but raw physical strength. While even the dragon seemed momentarily stunned by the display of power. The warrior tightened his grip, his fist crackling with intent as he prepared to turn the tide of the battle. Launching himself into the air, he delivered a thunderous uppercut that connected squarely with the dragon's jaw, sending the massive creature reeling. He delivers a devastating blow that sends the massive beast reeling, its agonized shriek echoing across the battlefield as its jaw is nearly shattered by the sheer force of the impact. Standing triumphant, the masked giant lowers his fist and looks down at the fallen foe, calling out to the creature with a calm, almost dismissive tone as the dust begins to settle. To the shock of those watching, he reaches down and lifts a tiny, pathetic lizard by its tail, the once mighty dragon having been reduced to this insignificant form by his overwhelming power. The creature, now small and helpless, lets out a series of high-pitched whimpers, its former majesty completely stripped away as it cowers before the warrior who defeated it. As the defeated beast scurries off into the distance, the young villager and the elf stand frozen in disbelief, struggling to process how one man could drive off such a terror so effortlessly. With the threat neutralized, the group settles into a makeshift camp under the cover of night, the flickering light of several fires casting long shadows against the surrounding trees and rocky cliffs. The savory aroma of roasting meat fills the air as skewers sizzle over the open flames, providing a much-needed moment of peace after the day's harrowing events. Surrounded by cheering adventurers, the masked warrior sits quietly while the men toast to his incredible strength. They hail him as a hero, laughing as they suggest that with power like his, reaching the legendary S rank is no longer just a dream. One man gestures to the abundance of food, explaining that since they have prepared for a week-long operation, there is more than enough meat and ale for everyone to celebrate their unexpected victory. He sits amidst the celebration, still encased in his heavy metal helm. Alicia leans in, her voice warm as she explains to the others that he is simply quite shy. Daria, holding out a tray of roasted meat, encourages him to remove the stifling armor now that the danger has passed. Hesitating for a moment, he raises his hands to the sides of the visor. Daria continues to offer the food, her expression inviting him to join the festivities properly. The heavy metal slides away, revealing his true visage, the tusks and snout of a powerful orc. Kirisu, standing nearby, can only stare in wide-eyed disbelief, his breath hitching at the sight. A wave of shock ripples through the gathered adventurers. Gino and the others freeze, the word orc escaping someone's lips in a hushed, fearful tone as they process the monstrous face before them. Amidst the sudden silence, he remains still, the piece of meat held firmly in his hand. He acknowledges their reaction with a quiet, almost resigned sigh. He takes a deliberate bite of the food, the crunch echoing in the quiet. With a calm demeanor, he remarks that he is often told he bears a striking resemblance to such creatures. The tension snaps as the group erupts into boisterous laughter. Gino and Daria lead the mirth, convinced that his appearance is merely a strange coincidence or a trick of the light, finding the idea of a helpful orc too absurd to be true. As the feast resumes its lively pace, the villagers and warriors alike share a laugh over the impossibility of a demon-kin being in their midst, let alone saving them. He continues to eat in silence, his secret safe behind their disbelief. He watches as the group's laughter fills the air, the tension of his reveal dissolving into a joke. Gino points out that Alicia had been calling him Orc-san, prompting a flustered Alicia to insist it was merely a nickname born from his uncanny resemblance to the creature. As night falls over the camp, the crackle of the fire is the only sound in the stillness. While the others succumb to exhaustion and sleep, he sits apart, nursing a drink and staring into the embers. The silence is broken when Alicia approaches, her voice soft as she asks if she might join him by the fire. After he offers no objection, she settles onto the ground nearby, clutching her own wooden mug as they both watch the dancing flames. She breaks the quiet to offer her sincere gratitude for his help, noting that his strength ensured everyone survived the day. To her, even the formidable fire dragon seemed like a minor obstacle compared to his prowess. He remains silent in the face of her praise, his gaze fixed forward as he processes her words. Sensing his distance, she asks why he seemed so troubled upon his arrival, questioning the source of the anxiety she saw in him regarding his ability to defeat their foe. Taking another long draught from his mug, he He simply states that when an enemy cannot be reasoned with, there is no choice but to kill it, his mind briefly flickering back to the memory of the scarred beast he once faced. He continues his grim reflection, explaining that while enemies who come with malice must be dealt with, even military dragons can understand simple words. Turning his gaze toward her, he adds that unnecessary killing would be a poor influence on a daughter's upbringing, a sentiment that leaves her momentarily stunned. They sit in a heavy silence for a heartbeat, the weight of his unexpected consideration for the young girl hanging in the air. Breaking the tension, she bursts into a light-hearted laugh, conceding that he makes a very fair point. Her expression softens into a warm, genuine smile as they share a quiet moment of companionship by the flickering firelight. Far from the quiet camp, the morning sun rises over the bustling stone streets and timbered houses of a grand city. A horse-drawn carriage rattles to a halt before a waiting official, who offers a deep bow of welcome to the long-awaited guests. Stepping into the light, Bishop Burzel, a man of faith with a sharp gaze behind his spectacles, prepares to begin his duties. He is greeted with the utmost reverence as he descends from his carriage. The local mayor expresses deep gratitude, acknowledging the rarity of a high-ranking official making such a journey outside of the traditional festival season. While maintaining a polite exterior, the mayor privately reflects on the man's surprising humility, which seems at odds with his imposing presence. The official then leans in, his expression turning serious as he inquires if a matter of grave importance has brought the church's representative to their gates. Maintaining his serene yet inscrutable smile, he explains that his mission is to deliver a new mandate from the recently ascended Pope, Saint Thudrich. This decree, he notes with chilling composure, provides a definitive new interpretation regarding the existence and rights of demihumans. The morning sun bathes the quiet house in a gentle light, marking the start of a new day in the peaceful countryside. Inside, the blonde elf approaches the massive ogre with a thoughtful request, asking if she might begin teaching the young girl the fundamentals of magic while he is away at work. He listens intently as she explains that the child possesses a remarkable amount of latent mana, and that regardless of the path she chooses in life, having such a skill will never be a disadvantage. With a solemn nod, the dark-skinned warrior entrusts the task to her. Later, in the open air of the garden, she gathers the two children to begin their first lesson under the clear, expansive sky. The young girl looks up, her eyes wide with innocent wonder as she asks what magic truly is. In response, the elf explains that magic is the power to rewrite the world through one's own will, though she simplifies it for them as the power to make wishes come true, demonstrating by conjuring soft, floating shapes that dance in the air. They watch in silent awe as the magical constructs, resembling fluffy rabbits and clouds, drift lazily above them, a tangible manifestation of the wonders they are about to learn. Overwhelmed with excitement, the girl cheers, her face lighting up with a broad smile as she declares how fun it looks and begs to start her own training immediately. She eagerly retrieves a nearby flower pot as instructed, her small hands gripping the ceramic rim while her companions look on. Alicia decides they will begin by unsealing her potential, setting the stage for the child's first true lesson in the arcane arts. Standing before her young pupil, the elf adventurer begins the mental exercise, telling her to close her eyes and visualize a misty, smoke-like flow circulating within her own body. Following the instructions, the girl lifts the heavy pot with both hands, her expression shifting to one of deep concentration as she tries to find that internal spark. Her brow furrows and her eyes narrow as she searches for the sensation of the mist, the physical strain of the task beginning to show on her youthful face. Sensing the girl's effort, the mentor guides her further, explaining that she must now push that internal mist out through her palms to completely envelop the pot she holds. A faint, shimmering light begins to swirl around her as she pours every ounce of her will into the vessel, the air itself seeming to hum with the sudden release of latent energy. Suddenly, with a series of soft pops, a vibrant green sprout erupts from the dry soil, growing rapidly before her very eyes. Seeing the success, the teacher urges her to maintain her focus, telling her to hold a strong image of a flower blooming in her mind right now. The child's face is flushed with the sheer intensity of the magical exertion, her eyes wide as she witnesses the impossible taking shape in her hands. She focuses every ounce of her being on the small sprout, her brow furrowed in intense concentration as a soft, ethereal light begins to crown her head. Watching the young girl, the elf adventurer stands frozen, her breath hitching as she senses the sudden, massive surge of mana radiating from the child. Her eyes widen in pure disbelief, the realization of the sheer scale of power being unleashed striking her with the force of a physical blow. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupts from the small figure, a shockwave of life energy that ripples outward through the air. In an instant, the single sprout in the pot doesn't just grow, it explodes into a cluster of vibrant, fully formed blossoms. But the miracle doesn't stop there. As the wave of energy washes over the entire garden, forcing every dormant bud in the vicinity to burst into a riot of color and light. The young village boy can hardly contain his excitement, shouting in awe at the transformation, while the elf asks in a hushed tone if the girl truly meant to affect the entire field. She confirms the feat, explaining that magic is the act of imposing one's own imagination upon the physical world, leaving the child to stare at her own hands in silent wonder at what she has wrought. She stares down at her small hands, watching as a faint, shimmering mist begins to rise from her palms. Alicia's voice drifts over her, asking what kind of magic she envisions herself wielding now that the power has awakened. Continuing her explanation, the elf notes that once recognized, this mana becomes an extension of the girl's own body, capable of bending fire, water, or wind to her will. She encourages the child to think of a specific path she wishes to follow. With a radiant smile and eyes full of hope, the young girl declares her desire to use magic to heal the sick, just as Magi once did. She explains that she wants to become a magic user who can take away the pain of others, her heart set on a path of restoration. This selfless ambition catches the elf off guard, her eyes widening in a moment of silent reflection as she processes the child's pure intent. While touched by the sentiment, a shadow of doubt crosses the mentor's mind as she recalls her own history of violence and the combat-oriented spells she mastered, visualizing the fierce battles fought by warriors like Daria. She worries that her knowledge is limited to the arts of war, far removed from the gentle restoration the girl seeks. Despite her reservations, she takes the child's hands in hers, deciding they will begin with the most fundamental healing techniques she can manage. Far from the quiet garden where the lesson begins, the village sits peacefully under the vast sky, unaware of the new power being nurtured within its borders. In the heart of the settlement, the scarred warrior approaches an elderly woman leaning heavily on her staff. He asks with familiar concern if her back is bothering her again, highlighting the everyday ailments that the young girl hopes to one day mend. He looked down at the elderly elf with concern, offering to carry her the rest of the way. He noted that her legs have been failing her lately, making the trek to the elder's house for medicine a grueling ordeal. She, however, offered a weary smile and declined, insisting that a brief rest would be enough to get her moving again. She was being watched closely by the young girl, whose expression softened into one of deep sympathy as she observed the toll time had taken on the woman. The young girl's presence was soon noted by the warrior, who called out a greeting and wondered if the children were simply enjoying the day's walk. She ignored the pleasantry, instead asking the elderly woman directly if she was in pain, though the woman merely commented on how pleasant the weather had become. She let out a soft chuckle, admitting that after 2 centuries of life, it was only natural for the body to begin complaining. This admission seemed to spark a sudden, joyful realization in the child, whose face brightened instantly. Her young friend stepped forward to explain, informing the adults that the village elder had just finished giving the girl her first lesson in the restorative arts. With a proud thump of her chest, she announced her intention to heal the woman's ailments herself. The girl's declaration was met with mild surprise by the old woman, who gently pointed out that the magic of a mere child might not possess the strength required to mend old bones. She was undeterred, playfully pitching her services as a special, limited-time trial that shouldn't be passed up. She eventually won the woman over with her persistence, and the elderly elf finally relented, deciding there was no harm in accepting the offer. The girl's face lit up with a triumphant grin as she promised to handle everything. Her confidence was met with skepticism by the scarred man, who crossed his arms and gruffly warned her not to worsen the situation with any half-baked spells. Undaunted by his lack of faith, she reached out and took the woman's weathered hand, focusing her intent on the task at hand. She looks up with determination as the young villager offers his encouragement, noting that even the village elder had praised her. The scarred warrior remained skeptical, questioning if the elder truly said such things. Moving closer, she gently takes the elderly elf's hand, and a soft, ethereal light begins to emanate from their touch. While the light intensifies, she recites a simple, childlike rhyme to banish the pain, prompting the old woman to chuckle warmly, remembering how she used to play doctor in her own youth. Suddenly, a violent surge of magical energy erupts from the girl, catching the warrior completely off guard as he recoils from the brilliance. The elderly woman gasps, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief as the raw power washes over her. Seeing the flash, the warrior cries out in alarm, rushing forward to check on the elder's well-being. To everyone's amazement, the old woman begins to hop and dance with newfound vigor, exclaiming that the back pain she had endured for 30 years has vanished as if it were a lie. She marvels at how light her body feels, a sensation she hasn't known in decades. Stunned into silence, the warrior can only stare with his mouth agape, unable to process the miracle he just witnessed, while the young boy simply smiles at the success. He stands there, still reeling from the miracle he just witnessed, when a young girl notices the jagged scar marking his cheek. With innocent enthusiasm, she offers to mend that wound as well, but he simply shakes his head, explaining that the mark is a 7-year-old relic from a past war and no longer bothers him. Despite his dismissal, a sudden, brilliant flash of light erupts, washing over the area with a sharp crackle of magical energy. As the radiance fades, he raises his hands to his face in utter disbelief, feeling only smooth skin where the deep scar had once been. Beside him, the others look on in awe, with the blonde elf remarking that the child's power is truly beyond comprehension. A warm smile spreads across his face as he realizes the weight of the gift he has received, while the elder woman muses that such a feat must be the result of the legendary hero's bloodline. They agree that a miraculous healer has truly appeared among them, and he offers his sincere thanks to the little girl. In response to his gratitude, she simply stands before him and holds out her small, open palms in a silent, expectant gesture. With a cheerful shout, she demands payment for her services, leaving him blinking in confusion as he tries to process the sudden shift from divine miracle to business transaction. She clarifies that the free demonstration was strictly limited to a single patient, and since the elder woman already received her treatment, he is now a paying customer. He can only stare at her, sweat-beaded and speechless at the child's sudden entrepreneurial spirit. Reaching into his belongings, he finally places a single, wrapped candy into her waiting hands, a humble fee for a literal miracle. The young villager walks alongside the girl, marveling at her incredible magic. He notes that healing elves is usually quite difficult, making her recent feat with a warrior all the more impressive. He is quickly silenced by a wagging finger as she stops to correct his tone. Instead of just her name, she insists that he refer to her with the respect she deserves, calling her Professor Nanoa from now on. His face turns red at her adorable yet arrogant demand, realizing how easily she lets praise go to her head, though he can't deny her charm. He stops in his tracks alongside her when they suddenly spot a small, plump bird lying helpless in the grass. They both look down at the creature, which she immediately identifies as a new patient in need of her divine intervention, even in a place as remote as this. She follows his gaze as he looks up toward the canopy, deducing that the poor thing must have fallen from a nest high above. He stands back while she kneels down and extends her hands, chanting a soft rhyme to make the bird's pain fly away. She smiles as the bird responds immediately, chirping with renewed life as it stands firm on the forest floor, fully restored by her touch. She remains undeterred, assuring her companion that everything will be fine as she prepares to return the small creature to its home. The young boy beside her, however, is hesitant. He points out the height of the trees and insists on taking the lead to ensure her safety, gripping his wand tightly. Taking the initiative, he invokes a levitation spell, his body lifting off the forest floor as he cradles the bird. From below, she watches with wide eyes as he ascends toward the canopy, the magic carrying him effortlessly toward the high branches. Upon reaching the nest, he gently offers the chick back to its family, encouraging it to return to the safety of its home. But the reunion is short-lived as a piercing shriek echoes through the trees, and the parent bird suddenly lunges with a ferocity that catches him completely off guard. The air is filled with frantic cries as the larger bird relentlessly pecks at him, forcing him to shield himself while still suspended in midair. Down on the ground, she calls out in alarm, asking what is happening, only for him to shout back through the chaos that the parent is treating him as an intruder and attacking. Once the struggle subsides, and they are back on solid ground, she looks down at the small creature in her palms with a newfound sense of dread. A troubling thought crosses her mind. Perhaps the bird hadn't accidentally fallen from the nest at all, but had been intentionally cast out. She stares at the fragile life, remembering stories of how nature can be cruel to the weak. It is a known, harsh reality that parents will sometimes abandon chicks that are sickly or too frail to survive. Looking toward her friend, she voices her concern that returning the bird to the nest by force would be a death sentence. He agrees, realizing that if the family has already rejected the chick, it will likely be killed if they try to leave it there again. She stands with a newfound resolve, her eyes burning with a quiet determination. The realization of the bird's plight has hardened her gaze, and she looks forward with a steady, unwavering focus, ready to face whatever choice lies ahead. The massive warrior walks through the quiet streets of the town, a heavy sack slung over his shoulder. As he passes the timber-framed buildings, a high-pitched voice rings out, calling for him. He stops in his tracks, looking down to find the young girl beaming up at him with a wide, joyful smile. Perched atop her reddish hair is a tiny, chirping bird, its presence as unexpected as her enthusiastic welcome. She excitedly introduces the creature as her new little brother, urging the small bird to offer a proper greeting to the towering figure before them. The bird lets out a sharp chirp, seemingly oblivious to the ogre's intimidating stature. The warrior narrows his glowing eyes, staring intently at the feathered intruder. He asks with a hint of suspicion what exactly the bird is doing there. In response, she explains that the poor creature was abandoned by its mother and has no home to return to, which is why she has taken it upon herself to raise it. She looks up at him with wide, pleading eyes, softly asking if her decision is acceptable. He maintains his stoic expression for a moment before giving a simple, gruff nod of approval. He tells her that keeping the bird is fine, much to her visible relief. She erupts in gratitude, hugging the air in delight and telling the bird how lucky it is. However, the warrior's practical nature takes over as he bluntly asks if she intends to eat the creature once it's grown, even suggesting it might make for good yakitori. As they walk together toward their home, she thoughtfully considers the suggestion, remarking that she will decide its fate once it has gained a bit more weight. He simply acknowledges her logic with a quiet grunt as they disappear into the shadows of the doorway. He settled into a domestic routine with the young girl and her new feathered companion. Their days were filled with simple joys, Nanoa running through the fields with a bird perched on her hand, while he prepared hearty meals in their kitchen. Even as she happily devoured her food, the little bird remained a constant, chirping presence at the table. The small creature became an inseparable part of her life, joining her and Alicia during their play and even sharing her bath time. As night fell, it would nestle close to her, its tiny heart beating against her as they drifted off to sleep together in the warmth of their home. Outside, the stone tower stood silent under a vast, starry sky, the peaceful chirping of crickets the only sound in the cool night air. He was suddenly jolted from his slumber by a frantic cry, his eyes snapping open as he saw Nanoa standing over him in the dim light. She stood there trembling, her eyes welling with tears as she cradled the bird in her small hands. Sensing her distress, he sat up and asked what had happened to cause such grief in the middle of the night. The bird lay perfectly still in her palms, its once vibrant energy gone. With a voice thick with sorrow, she explained that yakitori wouldn't move, no matter how much she tried to wake it. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks as the weight of the loss settled over her. Her expression one of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. Her grief hung heavy in the air as he watched her in silence, his usual stoic mask softening as he realized the depth of her pain. The playful banter about the bird's fate was forgotten, replaced by the harsh reality of a child's first encounter with death. He stands tall beside Nanoa as they approach the elder elf's home, the weight of the child's grief hanging heavy in the air. The elder woman gazes down at the small, lifeless form cradled in her palms, her expression etched with a quiet, weary sadness. Desperate, the young girl begs for help, her voice trembling as she admits her own inability to fix the situation, but the elder can only close her eyes and admit that even her power has limits. Turning her gaze aside, the elder delivers the harsh truth. The small creature has already passed beyond the reach of this world. Stunned by the finality of the words, the child stares blankly, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. As she holds the bird, the elder explains that while magic can mend flesh and soothe the sharpest pains through compassion, no spell exists that can restore a life once it has flickered out. Confused by the abstract explanation, the girl asks for clarification, her eyes searching for a meaning she can grasp. A sudden realization dawns on her as she wonders if this means the little bird has gone to be with her mother. She is watched by the massive ogre, who remains silent, his expression heavy with a shared understanding of loss. Turning back to the elder, the young girl reaches out to take the small, lifeless form of her companion. She asks in a small, trembling voice if this truly means they can never be together again. As the elder gently transfers the bird into the child's cupped palms, she explains that the little creature should be laid to rest by her own hands. It is a final act of love that the bird surely would have wanted. The girl gazes down at the still feathers, the weight of the elder's words sinking in. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now brim with tears that she can no longer hold back. A heartbroken cry escapes her as she pulls the bird close, the reality of death finally shattering her composure. Under the watchful eyes of her companions, she stands small and fragile, the silence of the room punctuated only by her weeping. Later, a simple wooden cross marks a fresh mound of earth, adorned with bright sunflowers and lilies to honor a life that has passed. The massive warrior and the young girl kneel in solemn silence before the fresh grave. With heads bowed and hands clasped, they offer a final prayer to the companion they have laid to rest. She keeps her eyes tightly shut, her small face a mask of quiet concentration as she finishes her silent farewell. After their prayer, the giant lifts her onto his broad shoulders, and they begin their journey away from the village under the cover of night. She leans forward, her voice a soft murmur as she calls out to him, prompting him to tilt his head to listen. As they trek through the moonlit woods, she asks a heavy question, wondering if he felt a similar weight of sorrow when he lost his own mother. He remains silent for a moment, the weight of the question hanging in the cool night air as she watches him, waiting for an answer. Looking up at the vast, star-filled sky, he admits that the pain was indeed immense. She follows up, asking if that profound sadness stemmed from the deep love he held for her. He closes his eyes briefly, confirming her intuition with a simple, somber acknowledgement of his past grief. With a gentle gaze, he explains that the depth of one's sorrow is often a reflection of the love they felt, a truth that brings a bittersweet glint to her eyes as they continue into the night. He walks through the quiet woods, the weight of the child in his arms a physical reminder of the bittersweet nature of affection. He reflects on how love brings joy, yet carries an inherent sorrow. As the small girl clings to him, her tears dampening his shoulder, the massive ogre remains silent, absorbing her grief. The bond between them, forged in loss, deepens in the stillness of the night. Elsewhere, within the safety of a village home, Alicia sits alone, her expression clouded by heavy thoughts. The quiet of the house offers no respite from the questions weighing on her mind. She stares into the distance, realizing that the bird's time had likely been coming to an end long before this day. The brevity of its life and the suddenness of its passing seem to haunt her. Her mind turns to the glowing halo that appeared above the young girl, a divine sign that even the seasoned warrior Daria had never manifested. Recognizing that the child's celestial power far exceeds what they previously imagined, she concludes that this development requires careful consideration. The blonde elf stands ready before the dark maw of a mountain cave, her blade unsheathed as the village of the demon race looms behind her. As she prepares for the onslaught, a grotesque legion of the undead surges from the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on the living. They pour out of the stone entrance like a tide of rot, their numbers seemingly endless. She narrows her eyes, steeling her resolve as the stench of death fills the air. With a sharp cry, she unleashes a holy blaze from her sword, the divine light incinerating the front line of the shambling corpses and illuminating the dark cavern with a purifying glow. As the flames hold them back, she calls out to the massive ogre, urging him to act. Nearby, the armored knight stands ready as Zaid. He's a colossal boulder over his head, his muscles straining with the effort of lifting the mountain's own weight. He hurls the massive stone with earth-shaking force, effectively sealing the cave entrance and trapping the remaining horrors within the mountain as the group watches the dust settle over their victory. He had made the task look effortless, and with the abandoned mind finally clear to the monster threat, the adventurers stood outside the sealed entrance, basking in the satisfaction of a job well done. One of the men, wiping sweat from his brow, suggested they celebrate their early victory with a round of drinks at the local tavern, noting how much faster things went with such overwhelming strength on their side. Despite the invitation, the knight in the heavy bucket helmet remained focused on his own priorities, prompting his long-haired companion to remark on how he remained a dedicated family man above all else. The armored warrior simply replied that his daughter was waiting for him at home, his voice muffled but firm behind his steel visor. Hearing this, Alicia chimed in with a smile, encouraging the group to head straight back to their families instead of lingering in town for a night of revelry. The knight agreed, his thoughts already drifting toward the warm dinner his wife had prepared for his return, finding more comfort in the idea of home than any tavern could offer. While the adventurers found peace, the atmosphere was far more somber across the city at the Croft City Mayor's residence. Inside the grand office, a maid approached the mayor with a worried expression, reporting that a difficult situation had developed that required his immediate attention. The official sat slumped at his desk, his head in his hands, as the weight of his responsibilities clearly took a toll on his spirit. He leaned forward, his face etched with anxiety as he contemplated the news from the capital. Though he had heard rumors that the new emperor held radical views, the reality of the situation was far more dire than he had ever anticipated, leaving him to wonder how much longer they could maintain order. Moments later, he escorted Bishop Burzel through the ornate hallways of the residence, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Once they were seated, the official broached a sensitive subject, questioning if the term demi-human was now being used to categorize elves and dwarves in official decrees. He noted with concern that such discriminatory language was becoming alarmingly common in recent days, and he sought the bishop's counsel on how to handle the growing prejudice. He sits across from the bishop, watching as the clergyman takes a slow, deliberate sip from his cup, the steam rising between them in the quiet room. He sets the cup down and reveals that during the recent coronation, the new emperor, His Holiness Friedrich, officially decreed that demi-humans like elves and dwarves are now classified as demonkin. Hearing his words, the official's face pales with shock as the bishop points out that Croft City is known for its deep connections with elves, who serve as teachers in the pharmaceutical and magic schools, and even work as adventurers. Looking at him, the clergyman continues without hesitation, stating plainly that the Pope is worried this city has become a breeding ground for heretics who pose a threat to all of humanity. Ignoring his cold delivery, the official frantically raises a hand, begging the bishop to wait and reconsider such a harsh judgment. He stands and shouts in disbelief, demanding to know what possible basis the new emperor could have for making such an outrageous and impossible claim about their neighbors. Facing him, the bishop responds with a chilling, wide-eyed grin, questioning if a basis is even needed when one looks at the eerie, inhuman eyes of those creatures, which he claims are proof enough of their demonic nature. Ignoring his unsettling smile, the official is stunned into a cold sweat, listening as the bishop explains that while their close relationship with these beings was tolerated under the previous emperor's interpretation, the current administration views such ties as a grave misunderstanding. He listens as the bishop offers a chilling compromise. If Croft's city captures its elven residents and delivers them to the Holy Knight Order, the city's supposed heresy will be forgiven. Continuing his cold logic, the bishop explains that these captives would be interrogated until they confess to being demon kin, after which they would be executed to serve as a public example of the truth. This blatant demand for betrayal causes the mayor to slam his fist onto the table, his voice booming with indignation as he rejects the absurd proposal. The bishop, however, remains unmoved, insisting that such an act is the only way for the city's leader to prove his religious devotion. Rising from his seat in a fury, the mayor reminds the clergyman that the demi-humans are not monsters, but veterans of the Great War who fought alongside humanity. He points out that victory would have been impossible without dwarven craftsmanship or the guidance of the High Elf, Magi, who mentored the hero himself. He refuses to back down, declaring that persecuting his own brothers in arms for such a nonsensical decree is an impossibility he will not entertain. In response to this defiance, the bishop's gaze sharpens behind his spectacles, his eyes narrowing with a predatory stillness. The air in the room suddenly thickens with a sharp, violent tension, breaking the distance between them. The bishop leans in until he is inches from the mayor's face, his looming presence casting a shadow of intimidation over the man who dared to defy the empire's new law. He narrows his eyes behind his spectacles, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he repeats the mayor's dismissal. The word absurd seems to taste like poison in his mouth. Rising from his seat with a sudden, imposing grace, the high-ranking cleric looms over the smaller man, his shadow stretching across the table. He reminds the official that as the representative of the Pope, his words are effectively the words of God himself, making any disagreement a direct affront to the divine. His face contorts into a mask of righteous fury, teeth bared and eyes wide with a zealot's intensity. He spits out the accusation, branding the man before him a heretic for daring to question the holy mandate. Trembling under the weight of that gaze, the mayor recoils, his hands raised in a desperate, defensive gesture. He stammers a frantic denial, pleading that he is a man of faith and would never turn his back on the heavens. Because the mayor's fear is so palpable, the bishop leans in even closer, his tone shifting from overt rage to a chilling, calculated concern. He points out that many citizens harbor friendships with elves and dwarves, suggesting that such bonds are a liability that could lead to a violent rebellion against the church's will, a danger he claims he is merely trying to prevent. The silence that follows is heavy, a visual standoff where the cleric's height and authority completely dominate the space. A thin, unsettling smile slowly spreads across his lips as if he has just solved a particularly amusing puzzle. He murmurs an acknowledgement, his eyes gleaming with a newfound, predatory understanding of the mayor's predicament. He then begins to weave a theological trap, recounting the tale of a saint whose faith was tested by God through the loss of his wealth and the slaughter of his entire family. He argues that while turning a blade against a friend is painful, it is precisely that pain that gives the act its spiritual value, framing the mayor's moral struggle as a necessary trial of his devotion. He continues his twisted sermon, describing how the man in his tale never wavered in his devotion despite his suffering, a sight that supposedly brought great joy to the heavens. With a chilling smile, he elaborates on the nature of such trials, asserting that their true value lies in the intensity of the pain they inflict. To embrace that agony, he claims, is to align oneself perfectly with the divine will. He throws his arms wide, his voice rising in a manic exhortation to find joy in suffering itself. Below him, the mayor can only tremble in silence, the weight of the bishop's fanatical logic pressing down on him like a physical blow. Later, back within the relative safety of his own office, the mayor sits slumped at his desk, the shadow of the encounter still hanging heavy over him as his loyal maid stands watch. She breaks the silence, her voice soft but firm as she confesses her inability to see the elves as the monsters the church claims they are. She reminds him that many in the city, including her own mother, owe their health to the medicines provided by the demi-humans. He listens, his expression grim as he acknowledges the truth of her words. Yet he reminds her that their adversary is not a simple foe, but the formidable St. Cross Church itself. As he stares out toward the city, he reflects on how the church has grown into a monolith since the Great War, uniting humanity under a single banner until its influence eclipsed even that of kings. To defy them now, he realizes, is to effectively declare war on the rest of the human race. Driven by a sudden, desperate resolve, he slams his hand onto the desk and declares that such a burden is too great for a mere mayor to carry alone. He commands his maid to prepare a carriage immediately, intending to travel to the capital and place the final decision in the hands of the king. He feels the cold sweat bead on his brow, the gravity of his decision weighing heavily upon him. There is no turning back now. The path to the capital is the only way to save his people from the church's overreach. Beyond the walls of his office, the town sits quietly under the morning sun, unaware of the political storm brewing. The timber-framed houses and the distant spire of the church stand as silent witnesses to the peace he is risking everything to preserve. The young girl and the boy sit attentively as the elderly elf begins their lesson in a quiet study. She explains that the strength of magic is ultimately determined by the strength of one's feelings. Offensive magic grows more powerful with hostility, while healing magic flourishes with love. Hearing this, the child tilts her head, confused by the concept of hostility. The elder clarifies, explaining that hostility is simply the feeling of disliking something, a concept the girl struggles to grasp. Her companion tries to help, asking if there are any bugs she finds unpleasant, but she remains uncertain. She admits that such complex emotions might be too difficult for her, even as the boy notes her picky eating habits as a form of dislike. The elder chuckles, deciding that for now, it is enough, as using such magic is a responsibility for adults. However, her amusement is suddenly cut short by a sharp realization or an unexpected presence. She suddenly shifts from teacher to protector, her voice sharp with urgency as she commands Nanoa and Kirisu to seek refuge in the underground cellar immediately. The children, caught off guard by the sudden change in atmosphere, can only stare in bewilderment as the peaceful lesson is shattered by an unseen threat. Turning her attention to the scholar, she orders Estelle to use the teleportation circle to reach the town and summons Zaid and his companions back to the village at once. Estelle's eyes widen in shock at the gravity of the situation, sensing the impending danger that has her mentor so visibly rattled. Without a moment to lose, the young elf activates the magical array, her form dissolving into light as she vanishes from the room. Meanwhile, the heavy thud of metal boots echoes through the village entrance as a group of armed men arrives, their presence signaling the end of the village's isolation. Leading this sudden incursion is Bishop Burzel, standing tall and imposing before a disciplined phalanx of knights from the St. Cross Church. Their shields, emblazoned with holy symbols, glint under the sun as they march into the peaceful settlement with an air of divine authority. He watches the village with a serene, almost unsettling smile, his eyes hidden behind the glint of his spectacles. There is a calculated stillness to his demeanor that belies the sheer force of the military presence behind him, suggesting a purpose far more complex than a simple visit. Observing the arrival from a distance, the village elder and his companion express their surprise at seeing such a high-ranking knight order in their remote corner of the world. They speculate that perhaps the church has come to investigate the remnants of the bandit group that the Dark Ogre recently dispatched, unaware of the true target. The holy man approaches the locals with a polite greeting, inquiring if they are merely on a routine patrol. He then shifts the conversation, mentioning that he has heard troubling reports of a dangerous demon tribe making a nest in these very woods, his tone remaining deceptively calm. In response, the villager attempts to put the bishop's mind at ease, explaining that the threat of the bandits has already been dealt with by their own hands. He assures the holy man that the village is safe, completely unaware of the deeper implications behind the church's sudden interest in their home and its inhabitants. The bishop smiles thinly, flanked by his armored knights. He remarks with chilling casualness that there are plenty of demon tribe ears to be found right here in the village, signaling the start of a horrific purge. His expression turns more predatory as he leans in, his eyes glinting behind his spectacles. He notes the sheer number of targets available to his men, savoring the impending violence as if it were a holy necessity. Without warning, the peace is shattered as a knight lunges forward, his shield slamming into a confused elf villager. The man cries out in shock, unable to comprehend why those who claim to be holy are suddenly spilling blood. Panic erupts instantly throughout the settlement. Screams fill the air as the knights begin their assault in earnest, cutting down anyone in their path while the terrified villagers scramble to escape the unexpected slaughter. The line of knights surges forward as a single, unstoppable wave of steel. They trample through the village center with shields raised, ignoring the pleas for mercy as they execute their brutal orders. Amidst the growing carnage, the bishop covers his eyes with a theatrical display of grief. He sighs, lamenting that despite his supposed patience, the villager's refusal to cooperate has forced his hand into this unfortunate action. He continues his sermon of false piety, claiming that while these people lack sufficient faith, it is a sacred duty to guide such lost sheep, even if that guidance must be delivered through fire and the sword. His gaze hardens behind his spectacles as he issues the final, cold-blooded command to his instructional knights. He orders them to burn the village to the ground and slaughter everyone, sparing only the high elves for his own purposes. He watches with cold detachment as his armored legion marches forward, their heavy, rhythmic footsteps drowning out the desperate cries of the villagers who beg them to halt their advance. In response to the invasion, a young man among the villagers roars in defiance, refusing to be branded as a demon after having fought alongside humans in the Great War. He hurls a ball of flame at the lead knight, but the soldier merely raises his shield, the fire dissipating harmlessly against the enchanted metal. The warrior stands unmoved, the smoke from the failed spell curling around his pristine armor as he prepares to retaliate with divine authority. Seeing their strongest magic fail so utterly, the villagers recoil in shock, their faces pale with the realization that they are completely outmatched by the church's forces. The knight mocks their efforts, declaring that such pathetic sorcery could never pierce the divine protection granted to his order. With a cruel command for the long-eared demons to perish, he and his comrades prepare to unleash a barrage of piercing light. Suddenly, the bishop's expression of cold certainty falters as a cry of agony erupts from one of his own men. A knight is struck down by a volley of light, but the source is not the villagers they were about to slaughter. From above, the battlefield is a chaotic display of light as the knights find themselves under a sudden, overwhelming bombardment that forces them to break their formation and scramble for cover. Standing amidst the swirling magical energy is a young elf girl, her small hands gripping a staff as she unleashes a power far greater than anything the villagers could have imagined, her eyes burning with a quiet, ancient intensity. She glares down at the invaders, her voice trembling with righteous fury as she demands to know how they can claim to be knights of the people while threatening the innocent. Hovering amidst a radiant aura of magical energy, the young mage remains a defiant figure against the horizon, while below, Bishop Burzel looks on, his voice cold as he calls for a justification for her interference. He remains silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles as he evaluates the powerful young being who has dared to challenge the authority of the church. A chilling, self-righteous smile slowly spreads across his face as he declares that their actions are justified simply because it is the will of God. Backed by a phalanx of his armored knights, the bishop stands firm, his presence radiating a terrifying, unwavering conviction in his divine mission to purge the village. Away from the confrontation, the village remains eerily quiet, the sun glinting off the tiled roofs of the modest homes where the vulnerable have sought refuge from the storm of violence. Inside one such dwelling, the young Nanoa looks up with wide, confused eyes, asking why they are forbidden from stepping outside, but the boy beside her can offer no certain answer. He admits that seeing the elder's uncharacteristically grim expression has filled him with dread, sensing that something terrible is unfolding and that their only choice is to remain hidden and silent. He and the others remained huddled in the heavy silence of the storage room, the only sound being a disembodied voice drifting through the air, questioning if their current course of action was truly the right one. Startled by the sudden intrusion, the young boy spun around with wide, panicked eyes, demanding to know who had managed to find their secret hiding spot as the other children clung to one another in fear. Before an answer could be given, a dark, viscous substance began to seep through the cracks in the floorboards, bubbling ominously in the shadows of the pantry. The mass expanded rapidly, a collection of obsidian spheres churning and growing into a singular, unsettling entity that pulsed with a strange energy. It rose before the trembling children, a towering shadow of liquid darkness that seemed to swallow the very light of the room, leaving them paralyzed with dread. From within the gloom, a woman clad in the elegant raiment of a sorceress stepped forward. She looked down at the small girl with a knowing smile, musing aloud that she might have arrived just in the nick of time to offer her assistance. The mysterious visitor stands framed in the doorway, her presence looming over the two children huddled on the floor of the storage room. She leans in, her voice a low, urgent murmur as she addresses the young girl, Nanoa, warning that time is running out to save those in danger. Beside her, the young elf mage struggles to stand, but his limbs refuse to obey, frozen by an unseen force. He gasps in panic, his mind racing as he tries to understand who this intruder is and how she appeared so suddenly. The girl stares up at the shadow cast by the woman's wide-brimmed hat, her eyes wide with uncertainty and fear. She hesitates, the memory of her father's stern warnings about following strangers echoing in her mind, making her heart hammer against her ribs. Sensing the child's fear, the sorceress softens her tone, explaining that she is actually a friend of the girl's father and that there is no reason to be afraid. The mention of her father causes the girl's expression to shift from fear to a flicker of desperate hope, her voice barely a whisper as she questions the claim. However, the woman quickly brings the conversation back to the grim reality, describing the villains currently descending upon the village and the very real possibility that everyone will perish if they do not intervene immediately. She holds the lifeless form of the small bird in her palm, the word death hanging heavy in the air as the young girl stares in wide-eyed horror. In response to the grim display, The child cries out in protest, her small fists clenched as she refuses to accept such a fate. The visitor offers a knowing, almost gentle smile, acknowledging the girl's desire to protect those she loves. Leaning down to bridge the gap between them, she places a comforting hand on the girl's head and promises to lend her strength, assuring her that everything will be all right. Meanwhile, the peace of the village is shattered as plumes of dark smoke begin to rise from the rooftops against the distant mountains. The threat is no longer a distant warning. Armored invaders have breached the perimeter, setting homes ablaze and filling the air with the sounds of clashing steel and desperate shouts. Amidst the carnage, the young elf mage breaks free from her stupor, summoning a blade of pure light, the prism saber, to strike back at the encroaching soldiers. One of the heavy-armored warriors lets out a guttural roar as the magical light tears through the chaos of the battlefield. He and his armored companions surge forward, their presence forcing the young elf mage to narrow her eyes in a desperate attempt to find a weakness in their formation. She realizes with a jolt of dread that these are no mere soldiers, but the church's elite paladins, gifted with a divine regeneration that mends even the most grievous wounds in an instant. They press their advantage across the scorched earth, and as she surveys the widening conflict, the grim reality sets in. The villager's bravery alone will not be enough to halt this relentless tide. Her attention is drawn to the high-ranking cleric who now steps forward, his voice booming as he addresses the elder magi, mocking the sacrifice she made during the Great War that left her power nearly extinguished. He continues his taunt with a sneer, asserting that the legendary strength she once possessed to lead the armies of men cannot be reclaimed in a mere 7 years. His command rings out across the battlefield as he points a finger toward the village, ordering his holy warriors to seize the elves, whom he brands as a demonic threat to be purged. She is left speechless by the sheer malice in his eyes, her heart sinking as the full weight of their peril becomes clear. Suddenly, the oppressive atmosphere is shattered by a brilliant spark of light that ignites within the swirling storm clouds above. A pillar of blinding light descends from the heavens, striking the earth with a thunderous roar that separates the combatants in a violent explosion of dust and debris. In the wake of the blast, the young mage and the bishop both recoil, their eyes fixed on the source of the sudden, overwhelming intervention as the paladins brace themselves. She stares in stunned silence, her breath catching as she struggles to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the power that just manifested before her very eyes. High above the battlefield, a lone figure emerges from the swirling storm clouds and crackling lightning, suspended in the air by an unseen divine force. A ring of pure, radiant light hovers over the figure's head, casting a celestial glow against the darkening sky and the chaos below. It is the young girl, Nanoa, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity as she floats effortlessly amidst the storm, her presence commanding the very atmosphere. Seeing her friend transformed into something beyond mortal understanding, the elf cries out her name in a mixture of absolute terror and disbelief. The young girl stares in horror at the devastation before her. Armored knights stand amidst the fallen, their blades still drawn as the scent of iron and dust fills the air. Overwhelmed by the cruelty, she begins to weep, a faint, ethereal halo manifesting above her head. She whispers a desperate question, unable to comprehend why such terrible things are being done. Her grief quickly curdles into a raw, agonizing resentment. Tears stream down her face as she grits her teeth, the words of hatred finally breaking through her sobs. This surge of emotion triggers a violent eruption of power, with bolts of white energy crackling around her small frame. She screams her loathing to the heavens, the air vibrating with the intensity of her burgeoning magic. Above her, a massive sphere of concentrated lightning forms, illuminating the battlefield in a blinding glare. The knights recoil in terror, realizing with a shock that the child is somehow binding the very elements to her will. Watching from the ranks, Bishop Burzel feels a cold sweat break across his brow. He warns those around him that no one could possibly survive a direct hit from magic of such devastating magnitude. He narrows his eyes, his focus shifting from the impending blast to the glowing ring hovering above the girl. The sight of that halo fills him with a sudden, profound sense of unease. With a final, piercing cry for her enemies to vanish, the girl unleashes the torrent of light. The energy surges forward in a colossal wave, engulfing the panicked soldiers in a white-hot flash of absolute destruction. She stood frozen as a new figure intercepted the blinding light. The young elf mage, her long hair whipping in the sudden gale, thrust her staff forward to meet the oncoming surge of power. With a sharp hum of resonance, a complex geometric seal flared into existence before her. Hovering high above the battlefield, the girl channeled her mana into the shimmering barrier, desperately trying to contain the raw, destructive force Nanoa had unleashed upon the knights. Gritting her teeth, the young mage poured every ounce of her strength into the spell, her face reddening from the sheer mental strain. Behind her, the child with the halo watched with vacant, glowing eyes, a silent witness to the struggle to suppress her own runaway magic. Below, the elf warriors watched the spectacle in utter disbelief. One of them cried out to their leader, calling her village chief, in a voice cracking with confusion as he demanded to know why she would expend herself to protect the very humans who had brought such ruin to their home. Ignoring the shouts from below, the girl maintained her focus, though her arms trembled under the weight of the energy. She whispered a quiet refusal, her patience finally reaching its breaking point as she struggled against the tide of life. Her gaze narrowed, filled with a deep, simmering indignation. It was an unforgivable sin, she realized, to force a child who had never known the warmth of true love to instead be consumed by a hatred so profound it drove them to slaughter. Sweat beaded on her brow as her resolve crystallized into a singular, defiant purpose. She would not allow such a tragedy to repeat itself, vowing that this cycle of malice would end here and now, no matter the cost to herself. But the power was too great. With a deafening crack like shattering glass, the magical seal disintegrated into 1,000 shards. The backlash was instantaneous, a violent explosion of light that sent the young mage reeling backward with a pained cry as the barrier failed. She refuses to yield, even as the strain of the magical clash begins to take a physical toll. Blood streams from her eyes and forehead, yet her resolve remains unshaken. She rejects the notion of failure, vowing to halt the destruction with every ounce of her remaining strength. With a final, desperate cry, she unleashes a blinding surge of energy that consumes the battlefield. The sheer force of the blast ripples outward, forcing the armored knights to brace themselves against the overwhelming pressure as the world is swallowed by white light. As the brilliance fades, the young mage remains standing, though her body is broken and her breath comes in ragged, shallow gasps. Behind her, the small girl watches in stunned silence, the chaotic energy finally still. Seeing the devastation wrought upon her protector, the child begins to weep, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and confusion. She whispers a broken question, unable to comprehend why someone would endure such pain for her sake. The chief offers a weary, blood-streaked smile in response, her voice barely a whisper as she reminds the girl of her earlier promise. She explains that such heavy burdens are meant for adults to carry, not for the shoulders of child. Reaching out with her wooden staff, she gently taps the girl's forehead, a soft light emanating from the contact. It is a gesture of both correction and profound care, intended to soothe the girl's turbulent spirit. The child flinches slightly at the touch, her tears still flowing as the warmth of the magic begins to wash over her. The realization of the chief's selflessness starts to sink in, replacing her fear with a profound sense of awe. Despite the gore masking her features, the chief's expression is one of pure, maternal warmth. She leaves the girl with a final, gentle admonition, telling her that children have no business involving themselves in such dangerous affairs. She watches as the child stands frozen, tears welling in her eyes as the weight of the situation finally settles upon her small shoulders. Her gaze remains fixed on the girl, noting the mixture of awe and sorrow washing over the child's features as a faint, ethereal glow emanates from above. The young-looking elder then pulls the girl into a firm embrace, despite the blood streaming down her own face from the magical backlash. She chides the child softly, warning that such immense power should never be wielded by one so young and unprepared, as it takes a heavy toll on the body. As she wipes the crimson from her eyes, her focus shifts to the armored figures closing in on their position. A dark suspicion takes root in her mind, questioning who could have been cruel enough to force such a burden upon an innocent soul and what their true intentions might be. Meanwhile, from the safety of his ranks, the high-ranking cleric observes the scene with a calculating intensity. He watches the two figures silhouetted against the sky, his mind already racing with the implications of what he sees. His breath hitches as a realization dawns, his lips parting in a silent gasp of recognition. He erupts into a shout of fanatical joy, pointing toward the halo hovering above the child. To him, this is no mere magical anomaly, but a divine sign, an angel's halo, and he immediately concludes that the girl must have been a prisoner of the demons all along, rescued by their arrival. Turning to his assembled knights, he commands them with renewed fervor, declaring that the capture of the High Elf is no longer their primary concern. The discovery of the angel has changed everything, and he orders them to secure the child at any cost, his eyes burning with a dangerous, holy ambition. He bellows for his men to secure the angel immediately, his face contorted with fanatical glee as he demands she be brought before the Pope. In response to his command, a wave of armored knights surges forward with a deafening roar, their blades drawn and ready to strike. This sudden escalation leaves the young village chief frozen in shock, blood trickling down her forehead as she stares at the approaching threat. Behind her, the elf villagers find their resolve, their faces hardening with a mix of fear and fierce determination as they prepare to stand their ground against the overwhelming force. She looks back at them, her eyes wide with disbelief as she realizes they are willing to risk everything to shield her. The knights, however, show no mercy, mocking the villagers as mere small fry and vowing to slaughter every last one of them as they crash into the elven line. Despite the insults, the village warrior and his companions shout back, declaring that they won't let a child carry the burden alone and that they will be the ones to protect Nanoa. Touched by their bravery, the young mage offers a soft word of thanks, though she gently tells them that it is no longer necessary for them to risk their lives. A faint, knowing smile touches her lips as she whispers that she has finally made it in time, her expression shifting from desperation to a strange, calm certainty. She had activated a summoning circle, which now erupts with light right before the advancing line of knights. The soldiers recoil in confusion, their formation breaking as they demand to know what is happening. From the heart of the arcane sigil, 3 figures suddenly materialize, a massive, dark-skinned ogre and 2 elves. They stand ready, the suddenness of their arrival catching everyone off guard. The scholar among them, her glasses reflecting the fading light of the spell, urgently calls out to the village chief, announcing that she has successfully brought the reinforcements as requested. Taking in the scene, the blonde adventurer gasps in disbelief at the sight of the holy knights, her voice trembling as she asks what could have possibly happened to lead to such a confrontation. The knights, however, only see confirmation of their prejudices, muttering that the presence of an orc alongside the elves is proof enough that these subhumans have been conspiring with demonic forces all along. Watching from a distance, the bishop lets out a cold, dismissive chuckle, adjusting his glasses as he sneers at the newcomers. To him, 2 girls and a common monster are insignificant threats that pose no real challenge to his elite holy knights. While the tension between the groups reaches a breaking point, the young chief remains focused on the child in her arms, her expression grim as the massive ogre surveys the bodies of the fallen villagers scattered across the grass. In the midst of the brewing battle, the young girl remains lost in a fitful, tearful slumber, her face wet with the evidence of the trauma she has endured. She remains unconscious as the massive orc stands before the enemy, his expression unreadable but his presence overwhelming. He admits with blunt honesty to the young village chief that he isn't a man of complex strategy or great intellect, preferring a more direct approach to conflict. The beastly warrior's resolve hardens as he stares down the bishop and his knights. He may not understand their politics, but he knows exactly which of them needs to be crushed. With a thunderous surge of power, he clenches his massive fists, energy crackling around his muscled frame as he prepares to unleash his fury. The paladins stand as the pinnacle of the church's military might, an elite order forged through the most grueling selection process imaginable. Their visors hide faces of absolute conviction, chosen from the masses to serve a higher purpose. Clad in holy silver capable of deflecting heavy artillery, they are further bolstered by the Eucharist, the blood of angels, which bestows the gift of near immortality, allowing even fatal wounds to the heart to mend in an instant. They are a gathering of legends who proved their worth during the Great Demon War, their names synonymous with victory. For any warrior, being selected for this divine vanguard was the highest honor, a sacred opportunity to fight as a pawn of the gods and prove their unwavering devotion. This was the truth they lived by, a faith so deep it left no room for doubt. But that certainty vanishes today, at this very moment, as they confront a nightmare made flesh. The massive black ogre bellows a challenge, his presence alone enough to shake the foundations of their belief. He lunges forward with terrifying speed, his raw power shattering their ranks and tossing the armor to lead aside as if they were nothing more than autumn leaves in a gale. He stares forward with cold, hollow eyes, his pig-like features set in a mask of indifference as he prepares to unleash further devastation. To him, the supposed miracles of the church are irrelevant. He reflects that neither the regenerative properties of a Eucharist nor the legendary durability of holy silver can withstand the crushing force of his fist, which he clenches in anticipation of the next strike. With overwhelming violence, the beast lunges into the fray, his bare hands shattering the knight's ornate armor as if it were brittle glass. A single, sweeping blow from his massive arm sends the elite warriors scattering like autumn leaves in a gale, their bodies broken by the sheer kinetic energy of the strike. The air is filled with the sound of rending metal and the spray of dark ichor as the paladins, once thought invincible, are systematically dismantled by his raw power. Despite the carnage, one knight manages to find an opening and thrusts his spear forward, only to watch in horror as the monster doesn't even flinch. His spear's sharp tip meets the dark skin, but instead of piercing flesh, the metal groans and halts, unable to leave even a scratch on the creature's unnatural hide. He is finally overcome by despair, cursing his fate and screaming in confusion as he demands to know why their sacred holy silver equipment is proving so utterly ineffective. They scream in terror as the massive fist descends, wondering what kind of monster could possess such overwhelming strength. The impact is absolute, crushing stone and steel alike with a force that defies nature. Because of this single, devastating blow, the realization sets in that their holy silver armor is useless. The blunt force alone inflicts wounds so severe that even divine healing cannot mend the broken bodies beneath the plate. Despite their prayers, he stands before them as a silent mountain of dark muscle, forcing the survivors to the grim conclusion that victory is impossible and only death awaits if they remain on the battlefield. They tremble before him, their knees buckling under the weight of pure dread as a long-buried memory begins to surface from the depths of their collective fear, triggered by the sight of his monstrous visage. Looking into those glowing eyes, one of them finally recognizes the nightmare from the legends. This is the Black Ogre, a name that once brought kingdoms to their knees. As their line breaks, Daria steps forward, her voice cutting through the panic as she commands the men to retreat, insisting that they leave the monster to her. She warns them that staying would only result in their useless deaths, while behind her, a knight collapses in despair, his sword clattering to the ground as his will to fight evaporates. While she prepares for the worst, he urges his comrades to run for their lives, shouting that there is no chance of victory against such a creature. He reveals the terrifying truth. This monster once fought the hero on equal terms, and every single person who stood against him that day perished. They scramble away into the distance, realizing that the beast does not seem interested in pursuing those who flee. With this realization, they scream for everyone to escape while they still have the chance, leaving the battlefield to the monster and the lone warrior. They stand paralyzed, the sight of the legendary monster shattering their resolve. The line breaks completely as the knights scramble away in a frantic, disorganized retreat, their fear outweighing their duty. Witnessing this display of cowardice, the bishop bellows a furious condemnation, declaring it absolutely unacceptable for the soldiers of God to show their backs to such a foul creature. He stands defiant, even as the massive shadow of the Black Ogre looms over his small frame. He continues his fanatical outburst, arguing that they cannot simply abandon an angel to the clutches of the demon race. To him, the necessity of a rescue mission is a divine mandate that supersedes their fear. With a look of manic zeal, the priest proclaims that Daria's joyful sacrifice was for their sake, and that saving her will ensure the heavens continue to guide their path. Daria, however, watches him with a grim, silent resolve, her face betraying the heavy burden of his fanatical expectations. Throughout the priest's shouting, the Black Ogre remains eerily still, his eyes narrowed as he observes the unfolding madness. The massive warrior begins to advance, his heavy, deliberate steps marking the end of the bishop's reprieve. Rather than flinching, the priest lets a chilling smile touch his lips as he reveals a holy pendant, seemingly possessing a hidden trump card against the beast. He grips this sacred relic tightly, a diamond-shaped pendant bestowed upon him at his investiture as bishop. This fragment of God's power is his ultimate trump card against the darkness. Unleashing its divine energy, he invokes the fourth miracle, Generation Fire. A colossal pillar of white-hot flame erupts, engulfing the path between the holy man and the towering beast. The inferno rages, yet the massive creature remains standing within the smoke, its bestial features barely obscured by the swirling heat. Maintaining the assault, the bishop channels more power through his staff, a complex geometric seal manifesting to focus the searing beam of light directly at his foe. He erupts into fanatical laughter, mocking the filthy demon and declaring that the light will purify its soul. Nearby, a stunned knight marvels at the sheer scale of the miracle, performed without a single word of incantation. However, the beast merely narrows its glowing eyes. With a sharp, powerful exhale from its nostrils, it releases a gust of pressure so intense it snuffs out the divine flames like a candle in a storm. The bishop's face contorts in disbelief, his mind reeling at the realization that his greatest miracle was dismissed by nothing more than a snort. Before he can react, the ogre lunges forward, its massive hand clamping over his face and lifting him effortlessly into the air. He maintains his crushing grip on the bishop's head, ignoring the man's desperate attempts to pry the massive fingers loose from his face. Looking down at his captive with a somber expression, he speaks in a low, rumbling voice, warning the official not to speak of things he does not truly understand. Nearby, Daria watches the scene unfold, her eyes welling with tears as the weight of the situation and the ogre's words seem to strike a chord deep within her soul. His gaze intensifies, glowing with a cold, white light as he commands the bishop to never speak Daria's name so casually or arrogantly again. The bishop's legs dangle helplessly, twitching in the air as the ogre's grip remains absolute, lifting the high-ranking official like a mere discarded doll. With a dismissive grunt, he calls out to the waiting knights before effortlessly hurling the bishop's body through the air toward their defensive line. The bishop skids across the dirt, crashing into the feet of his subordinates who cry out in alarm at the undignified and violent treatment of their leader. He stands tall against the horizon, his expression one of stern finality as he orders the paladins to take their broken master and leave, warning them never to show their faces in these lands again. He stood like an immovable mountain, watching as the armored knights scrambled away in a desperate retreat. The threat that had loomed over the village was finally receding, driven back by his overwhelming presence and the finality of his command. He watched until they were nothing more than distant specks, leaving only rising plumes of dust and smoke against the sky to mark their hasty departure. The silence that followed was heavy, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. Below those fading trails, a fragile peace settled over the village once more. The sturdy timber houses, though scarred by the tension of the day, stood silent under the clearing sky, waiting for life to return to its normal rhythm. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open as the fog of unconsciousness began to lift. A soft moan escaped her lips, the world around her still a blur of light and shadow. Standing over her was the massive form of the ogre, his usually fearsome features softened by a look of genuine concern. He watched her closely, waiting for any sign of awareness. He spoke softly, asking if she had finally awakened. Confused and disoriented, she could only murmur his name, prompting him to ask if she felt any pain in her small body. The girl looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, her voice a mere whisper as she questioned whether she was supposed to be hurting. The memory of what had happened remained just out of reach. Suddenly, a spark of clarity returned to her gaze. The hazy fragments of the recent chaos began to coalesce, and the weight of the situation finally settled upon her. With a sharp gasp, she bolted upright, her voice cracking as she cried out for her brother and the village chief. Panic surged through her, but the ogre quickly intervened, pointing toward the corner of the room to draw her attention. There, resting in an ornate chair, was the young elf mage. Though she wore a bandage on her cheek and looked weary, she offered a reassuring smile, explaining that thanks to the ogre's timely healing, everyone had survived the ordeal. Overcome with relief, the child threw herself into the mage's arms, burying her face in her cloak. As she held her tight, the elder elf began to speak of a more pressing matter, the mysterious woman Kirisu had seen entering the warehouse. She watches as the young girl bursts into tears of pure relief, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting as the child wails in joy that everyone is safe. After the emotional outburst, she turns to the massive ogre, agreeing that for now, nothing else matters but this hard-won moment of peace. As the room settles into a quiet calm, she remains deep in thought while the child, exhausted from the day's events, finally drifts into a restorative slumber. Reaching out with a tender gesture, she strokes the girl's hair, a silent promise of safety and care in her gentle touch. Turning her attention back to her companion, she offers her sincere gratitude to the ogre for his role in keeping the child safe. Though he humbly insists that she was the true protector of the village, she counters his modesty, explaining that while she may have looked after the village as a whole, it was his strength and presence that secured the girl's very future. The weight of that word, future, hangs in the air, causing her to pause as she contemplates the uncertain path that lies ahead for them all. They conclude their exchange with a shared understanding. Though the ogre believes fighting is necessary to protect what they hold dear, she firmly maintains that for a child so young, that time of conflict must be kept far away. She listens as the massive ogre offers his thanks, noting that the knight, Daria, shares his sentiment of deep gratitude for their recent safety. In response, her expression softens, her large eyes reflecting a quiet contemplation of his sincere words. The image of the young girl's innocent smile flickers through her mind as she acknowledges the sentiment with a soft word of understanding. Her gaze then sharpens, a more pressing matter weighing on her thoughts as she prepares to ask a difficult question. She brings up the mysterious woman who had approached the child, a figure claiming to be a friend, and asks the ogre if he has any inkling of who this stranger might be. He remains silent for a moment, his heavy features clouded with a deep, lingering sadness as he admits that he has never known the meaning of friendship. This admission stems from a dark past, where he was surrounded by cruel masters, grotesque, multi-eyed beasts, and sneering goblins, who saw him only as a tool of destruction, demanding he fight until his final breath because his strength was his only value. Returning to the present, he confesses that he lived in constant fear that if he stopped being useful, he would be discarded entirely. So he simply continued to obey, trapped by the terror of being unwanted. He stands by as the young mage absorbs the weight of his words, her expression softening into a somber realization. Because of this shared understanding, she turns her focus to the immediate threat, questioning the identity and motives of the one who approached Nanoa. She decides that the only way to find the truth is to confront the intruder directly. Stepping further into the room, The two of them face the shadows where a presence lingers. With a sharp command, the girl demands that the hidden guest reveal themselves, knowing full well they are being watched. In response to her call, a dark, viscous substance begins to bubble up from the floorboards, catching the massive warrior off guard. The liquid quickly takes shape, coalescing into the form of the mysterious woman in the wide-brimmed hat. She crouches amidst the remnants of the dark ooze, her presence filling the small space. Looking up with a knowing smirk, she greets them with an air of practiced elegance. She acknowledges her own notoriety, speaking of herself as the legendary, whose name has echoed through a millennium. Her arrival is met with stony silence. The young mage remains unmoved, while the ogre's gaze hardens with suspicion. Standing tall, the sorceress casually admits her past failures, expressing a lingering regret that she was unable to sway the elven people to join the ranks of the demon army. She stood before the young elf, whose weary eyes narrowed in recognition as she asked if it was truly her. She watched as the visitor revealed her true identity, Astaroth, known as the Lying Snake and the chief of staff of the Demon King's army, who stood tall with an air of dark authority. Night has fallen over the quiet village, the moon casting long shadows across the timber-framed house where the weary have sought refuge. Inside, the young boy finally rests, his breathing steady as he drifts into a deep, much-needed slumber. Watching over him, the two companions share a moment of quiet reflection, their faces etched with the lingering tension of the day's events. The scholar sits by his bedside, observing that he seems to have finally found peace in sleep, while her friend stands nearby, still on edge. While the scholar expresses her relief at his safety, noting the trauma he must have endured, the adventurer's mind remains fixed on the mysterious which had confronted them earlier. Suddenly, the stillness is shattered as both women bolt upright, their keen elven ears catching a disturbance that chills them to the bone. Her eyes widen in realization as she recognizes the unmistakable aura of a powerful presence nearby. Looking toward the ceiling with a cold sweat, the scholar gasps that the source of this ominous feeling is coming from the direction of the elder's home. She finds the source of the disturbance, the enigmatic sorceress standing before the massive ogre and the young elf mage within the elder's home. The sorceress addresses the young elf, recognizing her as the former chief of staff of the Demon King's army, and expressing genuine surprise at her survival. Turning her gaze toward the hulking Zed, she credits the pig's brute strength for their current situation, noting with a smirk that he was the one who truly finished off the hero. She continues her taunts, laughing at the irony of a hero being bested by someone he would likely consider beneath him, all while the silent ogre looms behind her. Her expression shifts to one of cold calculation as she reflects on the unfolding events, her eyes narrowing with hidden intent. Nearby, the young Nanoa rests fitfully in her bed, unaware that the massive creature standing over her is the one responsible for her current state of recovery. The witch explains that her intervention was a gesture of kindness, intended to give the girl the strength to protect herself and those she cares about, though she admits a secondary curiosity regarding the legendary angel's blood flowing through the child's veins. As the young mage watches with a mixture of exhaustion and suspicion, the sorceress chuckles, remarking on how, even in a weakened state, a witch of 1,000 years can still exert a terrifying influence. She gestures with a confident air, noting that the situation has unfolded far better than she had initially anticipated. Turning her gaze toward the sleeping child, she remarks that the girl is a fitting candidate to become their new sovereign. This declaration causes the massive ogre to tense, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective light as he looms over the scene. His muscles ripple and twitch with barely contained fury, yet the witch remains poised and indifferent to his mounting aggression. She calmly advises him to steady his breathing, assuring him that she has no plans to spirit the girl away, as such measures are entirely unnecessary. With a mocking tilt of her head, she points out that both the child and the elves she holds dear have already been cast out by the world of men. The realization strikes him like a physical blow, his eyes widening as the weight of her words sinks in. Nearby, the young mage remains silent, her bandaged face set in a grim mask as she absorbs the witch's cold logic. She remains a silent observer as the sorceress paces the room, weaving a dark narrative of political necessity. The visitor explains that in the absence of the Demon King, the world requires a new common foe to maintain order, and the demi-humans have been cast in that role to unify the hearts of the people. The sorceress leans in, her expression one of cold pragmatism, as she argues that manufacturing such a conflict is the most efficient way to ensure their own survival and protection. Turning her attention to the massive warrior, she declares that there is no longer any reason to side with humanity. With a chilling smile, she invites him to join her in wiping the filthy humans from the face of the earth. She continues her pitch, asserting that with the young girl's unique power, the demon race is guaranteed a final, absolute victory. However, the warrior's response is immediate and unwavering. He flatly refuses. This blunt rejection causes the sorceress's confident mask to slip, her eyes narrowing as she processes the unexpected defiance. The ogre's gaze is equally sharp, his brow furrowed with a deep-seated resolve that no amount of political maneuvering can shake. Undeterred, she reminds him of his nature, arguing that as a member of the demon race, he has no real alternative but to follow the path she has laid out. He stands his ground, countering that while his own path might be set, the girl is not bound by such labels. She has the potential to be human, an angel, or a demon, and the choice belongs to her alone. He continues his firm stance, arguing that the choice of how to live belongs solely to the girl. Whether she wishes to become a hero, a demon king, or simply live as an ordinary woman, the decision must be hers alone. In response, the sorceress listens with a sharp, calculating gaze. She acknowledges the sentiment of freedom, yet her expression suggests she finds such idealism misplaced in their harsh reality. While they debate her fate, the child remains lost in a deep, untroubled sleep. She is currently an innocent soul, unaware of the grand designs others have for her, and the ogre insists that no parent's legacy should dictate her path before she can even understand it. His gaze hardens as he makes his final decree. He will never tolerate a life defined by the hatred of others, standing as a bulwark against those who would use the girl as a tool for vengeance. Standing beside him, the young village chief adds her own voice to the defiance. She makes it clear that while they will not be passive victims, they have no interest in the demon race's crusade for human extinction. The elf's expression is one of weary but resolute determination. Her only desire, and the desire of her people, is the simple hope for a peaceful tomorrow, free from the machinations of both gods and demons. Faced with this united front of unexpected morality, the witch offers a faint, knowing smile. Her eyes remain unreadable, leaving the true depth of her intentions hidden behind a mask of amused curiosity. The young elf mage and her companion burst through the door, their faces etched with worry. She cries out for the village elder, desperate to know if they are unharmed. Instead of the elder, they find a mysterious woman in a wide-brimmed hat standing amidst the shelves of the quiet room. She remains perfectly still, an intruder in this sacred space. Her gaze is cool and detached, showing no sign of alarm at the sudden intrusion. She watches them with an enigmatic expression that betrays nothing of her intent. Recognition flashes in the young mage's eyes, replaced instantly by a surge of pure hostility. She realizes with a jolt of fear that the woman before them is one of the demon race. Without a moment's hesitation, the elf draws her blade and charges, the steel singing as she lunges toward the intruder. Yet, the sorceress moves with a fluid, unnatural grace, evading the strike so effortlessly that she seems to vanish and reappear behind her attacker. The young mage can only gasp in shock as her blade finds only empty air. Ignoring the failed assault, the visitor gathers a cluster of dark, grape-like orbs into the folds of her skirt, her movements casual and mocking. As the massive ogre looks on, she remarks on how crowded the room has become. With a final, dismissive glance, she announces her departure, leaving the elves to stew in their own helplessness. She stands tall, a mocking smile playing on her lips as she addresses the massive figure before her. She notes that his response wasn't bad, especially since the child has expressed a desire to grow up and become a demon king. She questions if he truly intends to let that happen without interference. The massive warrior remains silent, his back turned to her as he processes her words. He finally speaks, his glowing eyes fixed forward, stating simply that if that is what Nanoa truly desires, he will support it. While the young girl sleeps peacefully under the watchful eyes of the elven scholars, the witch continues her dark prophecy. She insists that the child is destined to become a demon king, and when that day comes, she will inevitably come looking for them. She lets out a sharp, mocking laugh, covering her mouth as she points out the harsh reality. Humans are incapable of accepting a creature tainted with the blood of an orc. Looking down at the silent giant, she accuses him of underestimating the cruelty of humanity. She argues that they lack the inner strength required to embrace anyone who is different from their own kind. Her expression turns cold and analytical as she mentions the St. Cross Church, dismissing it as nothing more than a catalyst for the inevitable conflict. With a piercing gaze, she concludes her thought, emphasizing that weak humans will always reject and fear anything that deviates from their narrow definition of normalcy. She continues her cold assessment, declaring that humans are fundamentally weak, cowardly, and cruel. The group stands before her, absorbing the weight of her cynical worldview. Because of this inherent nature, she argues that even without demons, humans would find reasons to slaughter one another based on trivial differences like skin color or origin. She paints a grim picture of the future, insisting that society will never accept a child like Nanoa, leading the girl to eventually despise humanity and her own existence. As the young girl sleeps peacefully, unaware of the dark prophecy being woven around her, the witch notes that the decade it takes for a child to reach adulthood is a mere trifle. With a chilling, confident smile, she decides to simply wait and see how the tragedy unfolds. Suddenly, her form begins to dissolve into a cluster of dark, bubbling orbs, startling the onlookers. She reminds them that to an immortal demon, 10 years passes in the blink of an eye. Moments later, the room is silent, with only a few dark, viscous stains remaining on the floorboards where she once stood. Stunned by the sudden disappearance, the companions look to one another in confusion, prompting the young village chief to offer an explanation for the demon's parting words. Despite the harshness of the message, the blonde warrior admits to herself that the witch's observations about human nature weren't entirely false, even if she hopes for a better outcome. The scholar adjusts her thoughts, reflecting on the recent skirmish with the Holy Knights. She acknowledges the grim reality that while no lives were lost thanks to the ogre's timely intervention, the outcome could have been catastrophic had he arrived even a moment later. Nearby, the young-looking village chief ponders their uncertain future. She questions how many humans will ultimately side with the church's dogma, noting that the elves must be prepared to shift their approach to human relations depending on the answer. She continues, explaining that unlike the Great Demon War where a common threat unified everyone, their current situation is different. They have spent years building bridges as medicine sellers and adventurers, making a total break from human society unlikely. The massive ogre listens as the discussion turns to the internal divisions within humanity. The chief points out that many people likely harbor doubts about the church's extreme interpretations, suggesting that human society is far from a monolith. He eventually interjects, asking with a hint of weariness if this heavy political discourse is going to continue much longer. Behind him, the others remain silent, weighed down by the gravity of their circumstances. His mind soon wanders to a more pressing, personal matter, Nanoa's upcoming birthday. He had intended to gift her a handmade muffler, but the realization that he hasn't finished it yet fills him with a sudden, anxious urgency to return home. This sudden shift in his demeanor catches the others off guard. Both the chief and the adventurer stare in stunned silence, clearly not expecting such a domestic concern to interrupt their strategic plan. The scholar, however, is less than amused and erupts in a fit of exasperated scolding. She reminds him that she spent a month teaching him the basics of knitting and is furious that he's struggling because he tried to add complex patterns before mastering the fundamentals. She watches as the young-looking elder bursts into a fit of boisterous laughter, her small frame shaking with the force of it. He listens as she acknowledges the gravity of the situation, noting that it would be a tragedy if the child received nothing for her birthday. The elder instructs him to leave the other matters to her and focus entirely on the preparations for the girl's special day, asserting that such tasks are her responsibility as a leader. She interjects with a look of concern, questioning if it is truly wise to ignore the pressing threat of the knights. The elder reassures her, explaining that they aren't simply doing nothing, and that there's more at play than meets the eye. She returns to the bedside of the young human girl, watching as the child finally drifts into a deep, peaceful slumber. It is a rare moment of tranquility, the girl's face serene despite the world's growing conflict. She stands alone later that night under the silver glow of a crescent moon, her thoughts turning to the knight Daria and the man she chose to love. She muses that perhaps it is time for the truth to be known. It looms in the distance, the spires of the Antares kingdom rising against the starry sky, bathed in the same moonlight. She gazes out from the castle's high towers, her silhouette framed by the cold lunar light as she contemplates the path ahead. She stands on the balcony, her face shadowed by the night as an official kneels before her in silent supplication, the weight of her station evident in her somber expression. She sits upon her throne, listening intently as the official explains the Holy Emperor's latest interpretation regarding the demon race and their place in the world. As she listens, the official continues his report, his brow furrowed with anxiety as he discusses the growing complications involving the dwarves and their recent movements. Moments after his report, she holds a sealed letter, the gravity of its contents clear as her attendant, Eris, notes that their worst fears have finally become a reality. In response, she rises with sudden purpose, commanding that a carriage be readied immediately and kept secret from the royal ministers to ensure her departure remains unnoticed. Her gaze hardens with resolve. As the Queen of Antares, she knows she must personally witness the child born of the union between a hero and a demon to understand the truth for herself. The young girl, Nanoa, beams with pure joy as she clutches a mushroom nearly as large as herself, exclaiming that she found one even bigger than she is. Her eyes sparkle with the simple triumph of a child's discovery. Carrying her prize, she wanders down a dirt path, her small figure dwarfed by the massive fungal cap she balances over her shoulder. Soon, her face appears behind a festive archway adorned with roses, her wide smile radiating happiness as she looks out at the gathering. The entire village has come together to celebrate, cheering and clapping as they wish her a happy 5th birthday. The air is filled with warmth and the sound of applause for the young girl. Amidst the celebration, She pauses, a look of mild confusion crossing her face as she repeats the word birthday, as if the concept is still a bit of a mystery to her. Her confusion instantly vanishes, replaced by a shout of pure excitement as she spots a familiar face in the crowd. She rushes toward the massive, dark-skinned figure of Zaid, calling out to him as her father and proudly announcing that she is now 5 years old. The ogre looks down at her, his presence a calm anchor amidst the bustling crowd. Looking up at him with wide, curious eyes, she asks if being 5 years old means she is finally an adult. Zaid listens patiently to her innocent question. He explains that part of being an adult is eating one's vegetables, a sentiment the young girl seems to accept with a cheerful smile as she looks up at him. Taking his advice to heart, she turns toward the village elders and the rest of the group to demonstrate her newfound maturity. She bows deeply and introduces herself, but her claim of being only 4 years old leaves the crowd in a state of stunned silence, as they were all gathered to celebrate her 5th year. When the boy next to her asks if her refusal to grow up is because of the vegetables, she breaks into a wild tantrum, shouting that grass is bitter and tastes terrible. To settle the commotion, the scholar approaches with a tray, gently telling the girl that it's all right and that they will stick to her favorite meats for the birthday celebration. She beams at the child, emphasizing that this is a very special meal prepared specifically for a very special 5-year-old. The plate is a masterpiece of childhood delight, featuring a variety of savory treats and a small decorative flag planted firmly in the center. The sight of it fills the girl with joy, and she cheers that the food looks just like a grand castle. She looks up at the towering figure and the scholar, asking tentatively if she is allowed to eat the feast before her. They both offer their warm encouragement, inviting her to enjoy the meal without hesitation. Taking a small, hesitant bite, her expression immediately transforms as the flavors hit her tongue, while the massive warrior watches with bated breath. She erupts with pure, unbridled joy, declaring the dish to be even more delicious than the rabbit brains she usually enjoys. Her eyes sparkle with delight as she clutches her fork, completely won over by the culinary masterpiece. Overjoyed by the success, the scholar raises her hands at cheer, calling out to the ogre who is already busy devouring his own portion with gusto. The relief and satisfaction are evident on both their faces as they realize their efforts were not in vain. They share a triumphant high five, their hands meeting in midair to celebrate the young girl's approval of their hard work. As the entire village erupts into a boisterous celebration around her, the little girl pauses mid-bite, looking up with a confused expression at the sudden noise. The massive warrior finds himself at the center of the festivities, surrounded by the village men who eagerly pour him drinks from a large barrel. Nearby, the elderly elf woman gently places a crown of vibrant flowers upon the girl's head, her face beaming with grandmotherly warmth. She runs through the village square, her face alight with pure joy as she waves a colorful patterned cloth. Behind her, the massive form of Zaid follows, while the villagers raise their mugs in a boisterous toast to the celebration. This festive energy fills the entire square, where tables are laden with food and the community gathers to share in the warmth of the day. From a balcony overlooking the revelry, the knight heroine watches the scene below, her gaze fixed on the small girl. Beside her, the young village chief stands in quiet contemplation. The warrior's expression is soft, a rare moment of peace crossing her features as she observes the child's happiness. Down in the square, the girl clutches the cloth to her chest, her smile widening as those around her remark on how her hair color is a perfect match for the legendary hero. Observing this from above, the young chief admits her astonishment, noting how hard it is to believe the hero truly had a child, especially one born of the demon race. Turning her gaze toward her companion, the elf asks if she is ready to speak of the past and the truth behind these revelations. The knight meets her eyes, the weight of unspoken history hanging between them as she prepares to recount the story. She closes her eyes for a moment, reflecting on the weight of the secrets they share and the burden of the path ahead. Looking out over the peaceful village, she explains that after the terrifying ordeal with the church, the appearance of any more outsiders might ruin the joyful atmosphere they've worked so hard to maintain. Turning back to the village chief, she requests that the matter regarding the letter of recommendation be relayed to Magi, her voice soft but firm. The young-looking elder nods, promising to deliver the message and expressing her gratitude to the warrior for indulging the whims of an old woman. Standing tall, the knight insists that it is no trouble at all, her expression hardening as she declares that they cannot possibly accept the new interpretation being forced upon them. With the conversation concluded, she turns and walks away, leaving the elder alone at the table with the remnants of their tea. On the table between the two empty chairs lies a formal document, its ornate border framing a message of great importance. The parchment is revealed to be a letter of recommendation for the Royal Ingrid Magic Academy, a gateway to a future that remains uncertain. The journey leads away from the familiar woods to a town nestled beneath the shadow of towering, snow-dusted peaks. Here, among the sturdy timber-framed houses, The weight of the recommendation letter begins to take on a new significance as the path toward the Royal Ingrid Magic Academy unfolds. The group gathers in the village square under a clear sky. It is a day for celebration, as the preparations for a birthday party begin. The blonde elf looks down at the children with a reassuring smile, promising to return before the sun sets. She is joined by Estelle, who calls out to her. Meanwhile, Nanoa's eyes sparkle with excitement as she talks about finding massive mushrooms to fill their bellies, though Kirisu quickly interjects, reminding her of the importance of safety and getting Estelle's approval before touching anything in a while. With a confident thumbs up, the adventuress signals her readiness. Her companion returns the gesture with a gentle smile, entrusting the safety of the two youngsters to her capable hands. They set off, the trio's silhouettes shrinking as they head toward the distant tree-line, a basket in hand for their foraging quest. Watching them depart, the massive ogre and the knight in silver armor stand silent. Their presence is a stark contrast to the peaceful departure of the children. Below them, the village square hums with a different kind of energy. While the children are away, the adults begin to congregate, their movements purposeful and coordinated. One of the men cracks his knuckles, his expression grimly determined. They acknowledge that the elf's excursion will buy them the time they need until evening, and they must ensure everything is ready before her return. The scarred warrior joins the other men in a boisterous cheer, their voices echoing through the square as they declare the start of the preparations for Nanoa's birthday celebration. He watches as Alicia's father turns to the massive ogre with a grateful smile, thanking him for his help and noting that it is all for the sake of his daughter. The elder woman smiles warmly at the pair, dismissing the need for gratitude. She explains that because elven children are such a rarity, the entire community finds joy in celebrating the milestones of the young. They all nod in agreement, their expressions softening as they reflect on the hardships the girl has recently endured, collectively resolving to make this day as joyful as possible for her. He steps aside as the young scholar announces her intention to begin the feast preparations, while the silent ogre stands watch nearby. A bounty of fresh ingredients is soon gathered upon the wooden tables, ranging from plump fish and cuts of meat to an assortment of vibrant fruits and vegetables. She gets to work in the kitchen, beginning the meticulous process of preparing the meal and pausing briefly to ensure the flavors are just right. As she contemplates the best way to serve such a large crowd, perhaps with a grand barbecue, the massive shadow of the ogre suddenly looms over her, catching her completely off guard. She jumps back with a startled cry, her heart pounding against her ribs as she looks up at the massive figure. Breathlessly, she asks what could have brought him into the kitchen so suddenly. He remains calm, his deep voice steady as he explains his intention. He reveals that he wants to prepare a special kid's lunch, specifically for Nanoa. Because of this unexpected request, she can't help but wonder why a seasoned adventurer would be interested in such a task. He simply replies that he had heard children have a particular fondness for those types of meals. He goes on to explain that Nanoa's growing dislike for vegetables has become a source of concern, having heard that finely chopping them and mixing them into a hamburger steak makes them palatable for children. He asks for her guidance in learning the recipe. Moved by his genuine care for the girl, she agrees to help, suggesting they prepare a special portion just for Nanoa from the bounty of fresh ingredients they have gathered. To begin their lesson, they decide to make hamburgers for their own lunch as practice. He ties on an apron and begins meticulously mincing the vegetables, explaining that the finer the cut, the less likely a child is to notice them. He then moves to the stove, sautéing the mixture to enhance its natural sweetness. As the work continues, she watches with a mix of awe and anxiety as he handles the knife with intense focus. Worried for his safety, she quickly reminds him to tuck his fingers in like a cat's paw to avoid any accidents. Despite the warning, his massive hand descends with a powerful strike, the blade biting deep into the cutting board as he processes the vegetables with overwhelming strength. He stares down at the snapped blade in his hand, his expression unreadable as he simply notes that it broke. Beside him, the elf scholar's eyes widen in disbelief, her voice rising in shock as she questions how such a sturdy tool could have failed so completely. Moving past the mishap, she begins preparing the meat on the wooden counter, explaining that while tastes vary, a blend of beef and chicken often yields a superior flavor for the patties. The lesson continues as she demonstrates the technique, explaining that the meat must be pounded vigorously until it loses its original texture, allowing it to be molded into uniform shapes. Observing her efforts, the massive warrior remarks on the apparent difficulty of the task, to which she responds with a light-hearted laugh, admitting that preparing large batches can be quite taxing on the arms. He clarifies the objective, asking if the goal is simply to reduce the mixture to a consistent, pliable state. A heavy bowl filled with finely chopped vegetables is set down with a firm thud, as she confirms his understanding of the process. Taking over the task, he plunges his enormous hand into the bowl, the sound of the mixture being crushed under his immense strength filling the kitchen. He announces the completion of the kneading process, leaving his companion marveling at the sheer power he possesses. She then guides him through the final preparation, explaining that once the base is ready, they must incorporate egg and breadcrumbs to bind the patties together. She emphasizes the importance of removing any trapped air, warning that failure to do so will cause the meat to fall apart during the cooking process. To demonstrate the solution, she takes a portion of the mixture and slams it forcefully against the cutting board, the impact driving out the air and ensuring a solid, well-formed patty. She watches intently as Zaid raises the meat patty high, preparing to slam it down with his immense strength to remove the air, just as she instructed. He brings his hand down with such explosive force that the meat patty practically vanishes against the wooden table. Realizing her instructions were perhaps too literal for someone of his power, she sheepishly admits her mistake and suggests a much gentler approach for the next one. After refining the technique, the final result is a perfectly formed patty, glistening as a rich sauce made from meat juices and wine is poured over its surface. They sit down to sample their creation, and as he takes his first bite, his eyes widen in genuine surprise at the delicious, sweet flavor. She explains that the sweetness comes naturally from the vegetables they worked so hard to incorporate. She believes that making a dish truly delicious is the most effective way to help someone overcome their dislikes. Hearing this, he looks down at the meal, wondering if Nanoa will truly be able to eat it. She offers a warm, reassuring smile, expressing her confidence that the young girl will enjoy it. After all, she notes, the food is infused with all the care and affection he put into making it. The two of them sit in a comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared effort hanging in the quiet air of the kitchen. He gives a slow, solemn nod, acknowledging her words as he processes the significance of what they've accomplished together. He may not have changed his outward expression, but she suddenly realizes something. Estelle watches him closely, noting that although his face remains stoic, she can tell he just smiled in his own way. It's a subtle shift that only someone paying close attention would notice. As the quiet moment between them lingers, the sun hangs low over the distant, jagged peaks of the snow-covered mountains. The vast landscape remains peaceful, bathed in the soft light of the afternoon. Suddenly, the tranquility is broken by a small, energetic figure rushing across the open field. The little bird calls out excitedly for its father, urging him to look as it heads toward the dense tree-line of the nearby forest. The night air hung still over the town as the lights of the grand manor flickered through the windows. Inside, the scholar's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as she processed the news. She gasped, her hands flying to her face, unable to fathom that the queen herself had graced them with a visit. Beside her, the massive ogre remained composed, his presence a stark contrast to her frantic energy. Seated upon an ornate chair, the young-looking elder spoke with a gravity that belied her small stature. She explained that the queen had come to offer a formal apology for the church's previous transgressions. Furthermore, a decree had been issued to rectify the kingdom's stance on demi-humans, promising to halt all discriminatory activities until a proper resolution was reached. This revelation filled the scholar with a sudden, radiant hope, her face lighting up as she asked if the kingdom was truly becoming their ally. The elder, however, remained more pragmatic, noting her own role as a veteran of the Great War and a current advisor to the queen, suggesting that such political shifts were never simple. To solidify this new arrangement, a formal document was produced, its weight carrying the authority of the crown. Turning her attention back to the group, the elder held out the parchment toward the ogre. She informed him that she had been entrusted with something specifically for him and a young girl under his care. She then revealed the nature of the document, a letter of recommendation for the Ingrid Magic Academy located within the royal capital. The ogre looked on, the gravity of this opportunity settling over the room. She explains that she was the one who requested the letter be written, surprising the young scholar who stands beside the massive ogre. Zaid listens intently as the truth of the recommendation's origin is revealed. Continuing her explanation, she notes that she deemed this course of action necessary, though there were other factors at play in her decision. Because of the deep bond they shared, the queen had always admired Daria, viewing the brave warrior as a sister figure. This revelation causes Zaid to stiffen, his glowing eyes widening as the weight of the connection between the queen and his fallen companion sinks in. Seeing his reaction, the small mage looks down with a heavy heart, confessing her regret over the immense burdens Daria was forced to carry until the very end. She expresses a desperate need to let the queen know that Daria did not die alone, that a man had been there to save her. She then presents a second letter specifically addressed to him, which he takes into his large, calloused hands while the scholar watches in silence. However, as he stares down at the parchment, he is forced to admit a humbling truth. He cannot read the words written upon it. Looking back at the village chief, he asks if the queen's name is in Rose, a question that leaves the small elf visibly stunned. When pressed if he knows her, he quickly demurs, leaving the connection a mystery. He sat beside Daria, explaining that the name Enrose only lingered in his mind because of how fondly she had spoken of the girl. To him, She was simply a younger child from Daria's cherished memories. He confirmed with a steady gaze that the name was indeed etched into his memory. Hearing this, the young village chief looked down, her expression softening as she processed the weight of his words. She then addressed him directly from her seat, acknowledging that despite the bitterness of the situation, the warnings from the one they called the lying snake held a grain of truth. Looking back at him, she recalled the moment Nanoa's halo first appeared, a sign that the girl's presence could no longer remain a secret from the rest of the world. The memory of the child's distress was vivid, a reminder that such power would inevitably draw a storm of conflicting emotions from anyone who crossed her path. Because of this, she explained that if the girl was to survive in society, she needed more than just the magical training the chief could provide. She needed to learn how to navigate the complexities of human interaction. She concluded that the best path forward was for the child to attend a school with others her age, noting that young Kurisu would be in the same grade come next year. She presents the document as a mere possibility, emphasizing that the choice remains entirely theirs. She makes it clear that she has no intention of forcing the matter, leaving the final judgment in their hands. She listens as the scholar questions whether the young girl should be consulted first. However, the massive warrior stares intently at the parchment, his resolve hardening as he declares his intent to accept the offer. He knows all too well that the mere mention of studying would normally send the child into a fit of stubborn refusal. The memory of her defiant shouts and dramatic protests brings a momentary sense of exasperation to the room. Silence falls as he contemplates the weight of the decision in the quiet of the room. He confesses a painful truth. Without an education, he is unable to even decipher the words on the very letter he holds. This admission of his own limitations leaves his companions momentarily speechless. Looking down at the small girl, he vows that she will never have to endure the same struggles and ignorance that have plagued his own life. For her sake, he decides she must attend the school, a choice she accepts with a quiet, simple understanding. She watches them with a knowing smile, but then adds a crucial detail. She explains that for the upcoming entrance exams, it is not the child's merit that will be under scrutiny, but rather the character and capability of the parent. Her words leave the powerful warrior completely stunned, overwhelmed by the unexpected weight of this new responsibility. He looked out over the sprawling city, where the steep-roofed, timber-framed buildings crowded together along the narrow, winding streets of the urban center. The fabric is a fine silk from the Nodia region, renowned for its wind-dyed quality, while the collar is a deep royal blue, a mark of nobility. Moving to the details, the gold embroidery was commissioned from a craftsman formerly of the Barrietta workshop, the very same that produced the legendary Unity flag during the Great Demon War. Even the buttons are meticulously crafted from genuine shell. Inside the bustling tailor shop, the customer admires his reflection, the garment fitting him perfectly as the shopkeeper looks on with professional pride. He is absolutely thrilled, declaring the suit a masterpiece worthy of his upcoming social debut. In his excitement, he tells the tailor to keep the change, considering the exquisite craftsmanship more than worth the price. As the satisfied nobleman departs, the shopkeeper offers a polite bow and a warm farewell, inviting him to return soon. Once the door closes, however, the shopkeeper's wife watches him with a look of weary disbelief, calling him a shameless swindler for the sheer volume of lies he just spun with such a pleasant smile. He simply offers a sly grin in response, justifying his sales pitch by pointing out that the fabric is indeed Nodia silk, even if it isn't wind-dyed, and the embroiderer was indeed a former employee of the famous workshop. Shrugging off her disapproval, he argues that he never technically claimed Nodia was famous for that specific dyeing process, and a former craftsman is still a craftsman. In his mind, he hasn't lied at all, merely framed the truth to his advantage. He continues his self-justification, pointing out that since he never explicitly mentioned real pearls, he hasn't technically lied to anyone. Looking back at his previous customer, he feels a sense of pride, believing he provided the young man with attire that would prevent any public embarrassment, regardless of the cost. Suddenly, the shop's bell chimes, and both he and his wife turn to greet a new arrival, only to find a towering, horned figure in a metal helmet looming in the doorway. His wife recoils in a panic, shrieking about a robbery, but the massive visitor quickly dismisses the accusation, stating his intentions are peaceful. Recovering his composure despite the sweat beading on his brow, the shopkeeper beckons the giant inside, though he privately wonders if the man should have sought out basic clothing before looking for a suit. The visitor explains that he requires a suit for his daughter's upcoming exam, prompting the tailor to explain that a man of such immense proportions would require a completely custom-made garment, which would be quite costly. In response to the inquiry about his budget, the armored giant reveals that the village elder provided him with 200,000 gold pieces for the occasion. Hearing the substantial sum, the tailor's professional mask slips into a grin of pure greed as he agrees that the amount is perfectly sufficient and prepares to take the necessary measurements. He politely requests that the massive customer remove his helmet, explaining that it's necessary to get accurate measurements of the neck and to ensure the overall silhouette of the suit is balanced. The giant simply agrees, his voice a low rumble. As the heavy metal helm is lifted away, the true face of the customer is revealed, a powerful, porcine visage with sharp tusks and piercing white eyes. The sight sends the tailor and his wife recoiling in absolute terror, their voices joining in a panicked cry as they realize they are standing before a literal orc. The massive customer remains remarkably calm despite their outburst, merely noting that he hears such reactions often. The couple remains huddled together, trembling as they try to process the situation. The tailor's wife attempts to laugh off the tension with a strained, nervous giggle, suggesting that it's impossible for an orc to actually be shopping for a suit. Her husband, however, can't shake his unease, his brow slick with sweat. A cynical thought crosses his mind as he stares at the beast, recalling the old adage about casting pearls before swine. To him, the idea of dressing such a creature in fine clothing seems like a complete waste. With a resigned sigh, he prepares his measuring tape, internally grumbling about the absurdity of the task. He decides he'll just go through the motions and finish this ridiculous job as quickly as possible. He steps behind the massive figure to begin the work, his hands trembling slightly as he stretches the tape across the orc's broad, muscular shoulders. He pauses, his eyes widening as he observes the massive expanse of the orc's back, noticing something unexpected about the creature's posture or build. Startled by a sudden movement, the tailor jumps, his professional mask slipping for a moment as he stammeringly asks how he can be of service to the imposing figure. As the measurements continue, the orc reflects on his own indifference toward attire, admitting that he never gave a second thought until recently, when he realized that his unkempt appearance was causing his young ward to suffer social consequences. He looks the tailor in the eye, his voice low and sincere as he explains that he refuses to be a burden to the girl, placing the responsibility of his transformation squarely on the craftsman's shoulders with a final, solemn request for his best work. 2 weeks pass in a blur of stitching and fitting, culminating in a moment of pure wonder as the young girl cries out in delight, her eyes sparkling at the sight of her guardian transformed into a figure of unexpected elegance. Standing tall in the center of the shop, the orc is a vision of refined power in his new black suit, drawing gasps of admiration from the gathered companions who praise his masculine and sophisticated new look. The tailor, now standing with a humble bow, asks if the finished garment meets his expectations, but the orc simply reiterates his lack of expertise in such matters. Despite his self-professed ignorance, he gazes at his reflection with a newfound sense of dignity, acknowledging that even he can recognize the exceptional craftsmanship before offering a rare, heartfelt word of thanks. He leads his companions away from the shop, while the tailor watches from the doorway, offering a polite farewell and hoping for their success. Behind the shopkeeper, his wife remains fixated on the cost, lamenting the use of black velvet and solid gold buttons that even royalty would find extravagant. She calculates the massive financial loss they've incurred for a single customer. He remains silent for a moment, his back turned to her as he contemplates the weight of his decision. Turning back, he explains that the Ingrid Magic Academy is a bastion of nobility where appearances are everything. To ensure they aren't dismissed or disrespected, a display of both formality and wealth was non-negotiable, leaving no room for inferior materials. Despite his wife's continued grumbling in the background, he stands by his craftsmanship, his expression softening with a sense of purpose. His gaze sharpens as he recalls the physical reality of the client he just served, specifically the state of the man's powerful frame. He remembers the sight of that massive back, a map of countless battles etched in scars, yet notably devoid of a single mark that would suggest he had ever turned and fled from an enemy. With a proud smile, the craftsman declares that his true calling is to provide attire that matches the character of such a man, regardless of the cost. He wears a look of quiet satisfaction, his decision to honor the warrior's spirit bringing a sense of peace to the shop. Beside him, his wife offers a soft, knowing smile, playfully telling him to stop his sentimental talk, though her earlier skepticism has clearly been replaced by a shared understanding of the duty they owe to those who truly fight. As they remain within the quiet shop, the morning sun begins to climb over the gabled roofs and timbered facades of the city, where the bustle of daily life is just starting to stir. The royal capital of Valerian stands majestic under a clear sky, its white towers and sprawling city streets a testament to its grandeur. Through these bustling thoroughfares, a horse-drawn carriage rattles along the cobblestones, carrying its passengers toward the heart of the kingdom. Inside, the young girl presses her face against the window, her eyes wide with wonder as she exclaims at the sheer number of people filling the streets. She turns to her companions, wondering aloud if the festive atmosphere is due to someone's birthday, a thought that brings a gentle smile to the elf's face as she agrees it's a possibility. The massive guardian in the tuxedo warns her to stay back from the edge for safety, while the blonde elf compliments the child on how adorable she looks in her new attire. The girl beams with joy, prompting the ogre to ask if it was truly all right to accept such a gift. to which the elf explains that the dress no longer fits her and was merely an old hand-me-down from her sister. A look of nostalgia washes over the elf as she recalls wearing that very same dress years ago when she first arrived in Alarium with her father to take her exams. When the child asks if school is a fun place, she offers a warm, reassuring smile and confirms that it is indeed a wonderful experience. She leans in close to the young boy, her voice filled with a gentle, encouraging warmth. She reminds him that the capital is full of children their age, and if they both pass the upcoming entrance exams, they will be able to stay together in the same class. Despite her comforting words, he remains gripped by a paralyzing anxiety, his face pale as he imagines the disastrous consequences of failing on the big day. Below his frantic worrying, his companions focus on their studies, with the blonde elf meticulously reviewing complex magical formulas from an open book to ensure they are fully prepared. Seeing his distress, she turns her attention to the small girl beside her, urging her not to worry and suggesting that she help ease the boy's visible tension. The child responds with a bright, determined smile, eager to take on the task of cheering up her friend. Following her suggestion, the young girl begins to tickle the boy relentlessly, sending him into fits of laughter as he begs her to stop, fearing that the sudden distraction will make him forget everything he just studied. The massive ogre watches the chaotic scene from the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable as he contemplates the weight of the trials ahead. While she continues her playful assault, the massive ogre shifts the conversation to the Academy's standards, explaining that the Ingrid Magic Academy places great importance on the innate abilities of one's kin. The blonde elf adds that children capable of wielding magic at such a young age are exceptionally rare, making their success almost certain, while the ogre notes that magical talent is often a matter of deep-rooted heredity. As their carriage rattles through the cobblestone streets of the capital, he reflects on his own standing. Despite his reputation as a trusted adventurer and the recommendation letter from the queen, he harbors a secret dread. He knows that if the examiners discover his own lack of magical power, it could jeopardize everything they have worked for. She looks toward him with a questioning gaze, asking if the village elder had provided any specific countermeasures for this potential problem. With a grim but resolute look, he assures her that there is no need for concern, promising that he will find a way to handle the situation himself. Suddenly, the carriage door is pulled open by a man announcing their arrival at the academy gates. Hearing this, the ogre immediately shifts his focus, telling the children to prepare themselves as they step out to face the challenges of the Ingrid Magic Academy. He lifts the heavy metal bucket helmet, his dark hand steady as he prepares to conceal his true identity. Once the helmet is firmly in place, the massive warrior adjusts his formal tuxedo, the fabric straining against his powerful frame as he prepares for the ceremony. Beside him, the blonde elf looks on with a worried expression, whispering that she feels a sense of dread, fearing she might fail the interview before the practical exam even begins. Outside, the Academy's clock tower marks the hour, while inside the Grand Hall, rows of nervous applicants and their families wait for the proceedings to commence. A distinguished man with a grand mustache and flowing hair takes his place at the podium, welcoming the crowd to the Ingrid Magic Academy entrance exams. He speaks with authority, reminding the audience that for 30 years, the Academy has produced the continent's finest mages and offers an unparalleled environment for study. His gaze hardens as he emphasizes that a prestigious school demands only the most elite students, setting a high bar for those hoping to gain admission. With a final word, he explains that the evaluation will judge both the students and their kin, before signaling the start of the practical trials. He continues his address, his voice booming over the restless crowd of applicants. He explains that separate exams have been prepared for the adults and the children, directing everyone to follow their assigned examiners to the designated areas. As he speaks, a bead of sweat rolls down his temple. He casts a wary glance toward a growing disturbance, his internal composure beginning to fracture as he wonders what could possibly be causing such a stir. The source of the commotion is a towering, muscular figure clad in a formal tuxedo, his head encased in a bizarre, horned metal bucket. The sheer presence of the masked giant leaves the surrounding staff and students paralyzed in silent shock. The headmaster marches over, his finger trembling with indignation as he demands an explanation for such a suspicious and disruptive appearance. The masked man simply responds with a quiet, muffled voice, claiming that he is merely a bit shy. This excuse only fuels the older man's rage. He bellows that the academy is a place of prestige that demands the utmost decorum, threatening to disqualify the applicant immediately if that ridiculous helmet isn't removed at once. Seeing no other choice, the giant reaches up and slowly lifts the metal casing from his head. Beneath the mask, the fearsome, tusked visage of an ogre is revealed, his glowing eyes staring back with an unsettling calm. The sight sends the headmaster into a state of pure, unadulterated panic. He stumbles backward, his chair clattering to the floor as he shrieks in terror at the realization that a monster stands before him. Unfazed by the dramatic reaction, The ogre simply notes that he is often told he bears a resemblance to such creatures. Behind him, the tension begins to dissipate into confusion as the onlookers wonder if it is merely a very convincing likeness. He stands amidst a wave of laughter as the tension in the room suddenly breaks. The onlookers, initially startled, begin to chuckle, convinced that such a monstrous appearance must be an elaborate costume for the entrance exam. Despite the crowd's amusement, the headmaster remains paralyzed with fear, his face drenched in cold sweat. He stammers in disbelief, unable to accept the possibility that a genuine monster has infiltrated the academy's hallowed halls. His gaze darts between the imposing figure and the small, calm girl standing beside him. The official's mind races with frantic questions, wondering how such a beast could be here and what connection it could possibly have to the human child. Turning in a desperate search for support, he calls out to a nearby staff member. The panic in his voice is palpable as he tries to find someone who shares his terror. The staff member, a man named Leo, remains remarkably composed while the headmaster demands that security be summoned immediately. The official's fear for the safety of the other children has reached a fever pitch, and he insists the creature be removed before any harm can be done. In response to this outburst, he suggests that the figure merely bears a resemblance to a monster. This only infuriates the headmaster further, who demands to know if his subordinate is blind, insisting that no human could possibly possess such a face. Because of this stubborn insistence, the staff member urges his superior to look closer at the details rather than the face. He points out that the suit the figure wears is crafted from genuine velvet of a quality so high that even royalty would struggle to obtain it. Continuing his calm assessment, he notes the buttons carved from pure gold and the rare dragon leather shoes, contrasting this opulence with the typical primitive state of monsters. The headmaster begins to falter, his certainty wavering as the sheer wealth displayed before him defies his initial assumptions. He recoils in absolute shock as his assistant delivers a final, crushing piece of information. The individual in question is the very same one who carried the Queen's letter of recommendation. He remains paralyzed by the news while the assistant raises a hand to soothe his nerves, arguing that there is no cause for alarm. The younger man reasons that even if the applicant were truly a monster, he would surely fail the rigorous gate of qualification that all guardians must pass. He continues his explanation, noting that every guardian is required to pass through that magical threshold. Below him, the elder official remains frozen in a cold sweat, his silence speaking volumes as he stares toward the massive figure waiting patiently in the distance. The massive, ornate doors of the academy loom ahead, dominated by a stern, bearded face carved into the heavy metal. Standing before this imposing entrance, the staff members prepare to initiate the proceedings. The man with glasses announces that the trial of the gate of qualification is about to begin, while the headmaster looks on with a dignified air. He continues the explanation, detailing how this gate serves as the threshold to the training grounds for upperclassmen. It is designed to respond only to a specific threshold of magical energy, remaining sealed to those who lack the necessary power. The headmaster adds a final note of caution, stressing that there are absolutely no other means to bypass this enchanted barrier. Consulting his records, the staff member calls out the first candidate. He instructs Alicia to step forward and begin the test, while the massive figure of Zaid stands silently in the background. She moves toward the gate, her elegant dress rustling as she walks. Despite her outward composure, she feels a surge of anxiety, questioning the necessity of such a trial and casting a worried glance back toward her companion. Suddenly, the stone-cold features of the door twitch with unexpected life. The carved eyes snap open, glowing with a sudden, sentient awareness as a low rumble vibrates through the hall. The surrounding crowd gasps in terror as the gate itself speaks, its voice booming with recognition. It calls out Alicia's name, greeting her as if she were an old friend, leaving the young elf and the onlookers in a state of utter disbelief. She greets the sentient gate with a polite bow, but the stone face responds with a booming voice, expressing shock at how much time has passed. It remarks that it seems like only yesterday she graduated, yet here she is, apparently old enough to have a child of her own. Correcting the misunderstanding, she explains that she is merely acting as a guardian for her brother's entrance exam. She urges the gate to stop the chatter and allow them entry so they can proceed with the day's business. She is met with a heavy, expectant silence as the massive stone face fixes its eyes on her with a bizarre, intense stare. The sudden shift in its demeanor causes her to recoil in confusion and annoyance, demanding to know what it is doing. It continues its strange performance, closing its eyes and puckering its stone lips. The gate dramatically declares that the princess is in a deep slumber and can only be awakened by a kiss, clearly testing her patience with its antics. It watches as a dark shadow falls over her eyes, her patience finally snapping. The air around her begins to hum with a dangerous, suppressed energy, signaling that she is no longer in the mood for games. She gathers a blinding sphere of magical energy in her hand, causing the gate's eyes to bulge in terror as it frantically shouts that it was only a joke. Its plea comes just as the light intensifies, ready to blast the obstacle aside. She watches as the massive doors finally swing inward with a heavy, mechanical groan, granting passage. The gate grumbles to itself, lamenting that the former committee chair still has absolutely no sense of humor, even after all this time. It mutters that for someone who frequented these halls every day until 2 years ago, an entrance exam should be entirely unnecessary. She strides through the threshold without a backward glance, sternly advising the gate to take its duties more seriously. She has made her entrance, leaving the staff to discuss the impossibility of what they just witnessed. The headmaster acknowledges Leo's point, noting that orcs are typically low-level monsters devoid of magical power, making the current situation highly irregular. Standing before them is the next examinee, a massive figure in an ill-fitting formal suit. He reflects on the absolute nature of the gate, confident that it would never yield to those lacking the necessary spark. Yet he remains strangely unperturbed. Leo, clutching his clipboard, calls out for the 13th candidate to step forward. He signals for the trial to commence, his gaze fixed on the imposing form of the one known as Z. As the massive candidate strides toward his destiny, a familiar face in the crowd reacts with pure disbelief. Gino, the scarred adventurer, can hardly contain his shock, questioning why a mere orc would even attempt to enroll in such a prestigious institution. He continues his outburst, pointing frantically at the candidate's porcine features. He insists that the resemblance must be a fluke, shouting that it is fundamentally impossible for such a creature to stand where he does. His panic turns to aggression as he demands that security be summoned immediately. He calls for the intruder's elimination, his face contorted with a mix of fear and indignant rage. Ignoring the frantic shouts behind him, the massive figure simply clenches his fist. The sound of straining leather and tensing muscle fills the air as he prepares to prove his worth through sheer force. He stands before the ornate doors, the headmaster's earlier words about the magical limitations of his kind echoing in the silence. With a calm resolve, he declares that if he can simply force the gate to yield, his lack of conventional magic should be of no consequence. He stands before the massive stone face, which stares back with wide, unblinking eyes, assessing the challenger who dares to stand in its path. The sentient barrier erupts in a mocking laughter, its stone features contorting as it dares the challenger to try his worst, calling him a fool for even attempting such a feat against its ancient defenses. As the warrior clenches his massive fist, the gate continues its boast, claiming to be a creation of the 1,000-year witch herself, forged from indestructible magic iron that no mere Orcish strike could ever hope to mar. It mocks the very idea of physical strength overcoming its magical pedigree. Undeterred by the insults, the muscular figure focuses his intent, the veins in his neck bulging as he channels his immense physical power into a single point of absolute concentration. With a sudden, explosive movement, he drives his fist into the stone surface, the force of the impact sending a dull thud echoing through the hall as the air ripples from the shockwave. The once boisterous face falls silent, its stone eyes widening in a sudden, chilling realization of the raw, overwhelming power it just encountered. Preparing for a second, even more devastating blow, the father whispers a quiet apology, stating that his actions are for the sake of his daughter as he tightens his grip once more. A deafening roar of impact fills the air as the gate screams in genuine terror, the sheer force of the strike causing the very foundations of the academy to tremble while onlookers watch in stunned silence. He follows through with the strike, his massive fist buried deep into the magical barrier. The force of the impact ripples through the air, a testament to his overwhelming physical power. Observing the result with a stoic expression, he simply notes that the path forward has finally been cleared. Behind him, the sentient stone face of the gate is drenched in a cold sweat, gasping for air as if it had just narrowly escaped death. As he steps through the threshold, the silence in the hall is heavy, leaving the gate in a state of shock as it processes the sheer impossibility of what just occurred. It trembles, fully aware that had it not yielded at that exact moment, its very existence would have been reduced to dust. This display of raw strength leaves the onlookers speechless. Gino can only stare in disbelief, questioning the nature of the creature before him and wondering if the gate truly opened of its own accord. Desperate to maintain its dignity, the gate forces a hollow laugh, internally panicking at the thought of being discarded as a defective tool while marveling at the terrifying pressure the orc exerted. Attempting to save face, the adventurer lets out a strained laugh, claiming he must have misjudged the situation entirely, though the academy officials remained silent and unconvinced. He remained frozen in disbelief, mirroring the expression of the headmaster who stared in stunned silence, questioning his own sanity at the impossible sight before him. Looking at the massive, muscular back of the candidate, the official tried to rationalize the situation, desperately hoping his eyes were merely mistaking a pig-like face for that of a truor. The beast turned slightly, his glowing eyes meeting the headmaster's as he calmly inquired if he was permitted to enter the academy. In response to the creature's question, the official's composure shattered into a frantic, sweating mess as he stammered out a confirmation of the candidate's success, urging him to proceed. As the massive figure strode past, the staff watched in paralyzed awe while the headmaster stood small in the distance, his authority dwarfed by the warrior's presence. He gritted his teeth, a cold sweat beading on his brow as a new, desperate resolve took hold. Since no one else could be relied upon, he would be the one to ensure this monster failed the final evaluation.